So you're talking about Nokia specifically here?
This CEO appointment didn't signify that Nokia's focus now is on AI and data centres. Nokia's focus.
Well, I think it did.
So I don't, because I wrote the story about 3 months ago. So it didn't. Nokia. I wrote a story.
Fucking pulling rank on me now.
I'm not pulling rank on you. I'm just saying this didn't signify. I wrote a story several months ago.
He'll have you know.
Nokia has a growth story all of a sudden, and it's to do with AI. I think that's pretty
but
much
I think,
my headline.
I think you need.
Okay, but I think this.
The signification of them. Yes, it might cement it, but the signification of it came when Pekka Lundmark said, "Oh, big growth opportunities now in data center and AI. It's not in 5G anymore." That's the signification of the thing. This wasn't a new thing that they've just come up with. It was already established for months. Anybody who's just noticed it was obviously sleeping on the.
I think maybe a question for you. As 6G will eventually come, do you think their priority will remain on data center and AI, or will shift back to 6G?
I think that's a really good question, because.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I'm getting into good habits of not embarking on the opening bollocks before I announce that we've got a guest, so I'm going to keep that good habit going. I'm delighted to say we've got our friend and colleague Pablo Tomasi from Omdia on the pod. Welcome, Pablo.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Cool. And you brought a six-pack of Budvars, so you obviously understand how things work around here. Well done. I might nick one off for you in a bit, if that's all right.
No problem. I've been following you guys for quite some time.
Right.
And
so
it seems that beer is kind of... the element.
It was around about 2020, I mean, where it sort of really kicked in.
It was because we were so depressed during the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. In common with a lot of people during the pandemic, we took to the bottle.
Are you saying it was medicinal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need something to get
/ mental health.
So before you weren't drinking then?
Well, we did occasionally. I remember the first time we broke the seal is when an old producer had left a bottle of JD in the studio. And we just thought, all right, we'll just neck some of this JD. And we felt very naughty then. And we'd still do, sometimes we have guests bring us spirits. We had this. You can try a bit of that if you want. Check out. This is brimstone I'm showing him. Check out the percentage alcohol.
It's pretty.
Yeah, that doesn't fuck around.
Pretty intense.
We had a Finnish guy on a few weeks ago who was into this thing they call long drink, which is like gin and sort of grapefruit soda. So yeah, but our default, as I'm sure you know, is the old Hazy Jane. Yeah. Partly because it's not too gassy, so you're not burping.
I think if
so
the
much.
default was that, then we'd be in real trouble, wouldn't we?
We would. I like to think that we stay the right side of sort of Keith Richards on this stuff. So Pablo, actually your timing is impeccable, because the main segment we're going to talk about is Ericsson's pre-Mobile Congress announcement, which I saw you at fleetingly. And it's doubly timely because not only were you there and we can compare notes with you, but a lot of their pitch these days is about enterprise wireless, which is your speciality within Omdia. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Ericsson is one of the many vendors and telcos that are really putting their focus on enterprises and really have high hopes and expectations of. So
we'll interrogate those. I know Ian, for example, inclines towards skeptical about some of that, and anyway, we'll get into all that. And then the other thing we're going to talk about is Nokia's new CEO. In fact, that'll probably be the three things. We'll do Ericsson, enterprise wireless in a broader sense, and then we'll finish by talking about Nokia's new CEO. But we've got a fair bit of opening bollocks to get through this week. So obviously we got the Ericsson thing, and then we got to give a shout out to Ben and Hazel from Huawei, who took us out for dinner after. In case anyone from Ericsson's wondering, it wasn't them like trying to be cute and going, let's see if we can gate crash Ericsson. It just happened to be, I was chatting to Ben about dates. He said he was around on the 12th. I said, well, I'm going to be in town. How about I meet you after? It was nothing more than that. And I don't think Ericsson had anything, they're going to hate me for saying it, but post Jerry leaving, there's
I don't know
slightly less of a sort of gravitation towards going to the pub, I think.
I don't want to be unfair on them, because Carl at Ericsson did say you were around later, and I wasn't sure whether he meant just the drinks afterwards.
So did John Morwood said that to me as well.
They might have ended up out, and if we'd been there, we might have ended up out with them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, totally. I'm not saying that they were totally reliant on Jerry.
I need to do a shout out as well.
She was quite good. Yeah, go on.
Because you weren't there last night, but there was an interdigital dinner.
Yeah. So go ahead.
And which was really nice and like good to catch up with those guys. Organised by CC Group. It was a chap called Alan Murad, he's the sort of expert on. It's called ISAC. It's the sensing stuff in 6G.
Right.
Really.
The sort of radar sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like a combination of using base stations, but also like ordinary devices like your smartphone to do
just the reflection of electromagnetic waves.
Quite sophisticated level of sensing. I mean, we talked about it in a jokey way before, like you could sort of figure out how much liquid's gone from your beer glass and stuff like that. But there are kind of use cases to do with like lane tracking for self-driving cars and that kind of thing. You know, like staying in the middle of the lanes and avoiding obstacles and this sort of stuff. It was interesting because I had a chat with Eric Ekuden, the CTO, sort of on the sidelines. I didn't actually have a direct meeting with him, but I ended up sort of almost doing that anyway, kind of at the drinks afterwards. And the one thing that he was calling out in 6G that he said actually sounds a little bit different was the sensing stuff.
Yeah.
You know, that's maybe the thing that could be.
Well, and it's consistent when we'll get into it when we do the main segment. It's consistent with the messaging that I was getting from Ericsson on the day as well in terms of making bets on sort of future use cases.
Yeah, and then I just mentioned the other guy that was I'd not met really before. I have met him before, but not really kind of chatted with him. Was Richard on the sort of PR side of Interdigital.
Okay.
So it was good to sort of meet him. But it's a really really nice meal. I mean, I'm kind of happy to be invited to things like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry I had to knock it on the head. It does sound like it was top grub.
Yeah.
What was the restaurant?
What was the star dish? Sorry.
The restaurant, I can't remember the name of it, but it was near St Paul's.
Okay. What sort of food was it?
Well, I had like a smoked salmon starter. I had a ribeye steak. As a main course with some sides and then tiramisu for dessert, but they're all really high quality ones. Like tiramisu's often like bad.
Can be a bit moody, yeah.
Steak is a common choice in most of these events.
It is.
I noticed
it's a fairly safe choice.
Yeah.
Was it cooked to your liking?
It was. So I went for it. Yeah, Richard and I had the same thing, and he was getting. I'm not sure whether to get it rare or medium rare because I like it quite rare, but I don't want it. If you ask for that in France, it tends to come back sort of crawling on your plate. And he went for rare, and I went for medium rare. And I think he goes, "You've gone, you've picked the right choice." This was a little bit too.
They just sort of waved it under a light bulb for a bit.
To be honest with you, it looked all right to me, his as well. But it was really good food anyway. It was excellent, and the tiramisu was good because they're often crap.
Cool. Well, talking about steak, and the previous night we went out with Ben and Hazel from Huawei. It wasn't such a posh restaurant, but that's not their fault. They were just
pretty good food, though.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, it was lovely. I'm not complaining, but it was just happened to be over the road from where we were with Ericsson. That's how it got chosen.
It was literally over the road.
Yeah, it's literally over the road. And do you remember I had a T-bone steak?
Yeah,
it was fucking huge.
It was. It was half the animal.
Yeah. So that was all good fun. And actually, we should a couple of other things to mention. You know, obviously we were just chatting to them off the record, so I'm not going to recount anything we said. But Ben did flag up what I said on the pod previously, where I'd said jokingly, you know, given how little press material Huawei gives them, I wonder what they do most of the time apart from getting us pissed. And he's like, "Thanks a lot for that, Scott."
So you've just done it again.
But well, he assured me that they're very busy, but I'm not going to detail their job. But no, they are very busy. They've actually got a pretty broad remit. Yeah. So it does involve a little bit more than just getting you and me pissed and giving us massive steaks. But sorry about that, Ben. If you make it this far in the pod, he was another person who was going, "Fucking you go on a bit." And what else was I going to say? Oh, and thanks to them for, at the last minute, we were chatting to our old boss and colleague, Ray Lemaitre, who's now at Telecom TV. And he was saying he's normally like bails quite early because he's got a bit sensible these days. But he's saying, "No, I'm out. I'm out for the duration." And we went, "Oh, shall I ask Huawei if they mind you coming along?" And they said, "Yeah, go ahead."
Yeah.
And Ray sort of figured it was going to be some big gathering like at Mobile World Congress or something. So I think he felt slightly self-conscious, like he was gate crashing, but not at all. I mean, he's great company, and I'm sure Ben and Hazel were grateful to get to know him.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for opening bollocks. Oh, just one other thing. I actually got from the Ericsson event. I actually got an exclusive, which I haven't written up yet, but maybe I'll just have it as an exclusive on this pod. So you can see it was so exclusive. They only gave it to me on paper as opposed to electronic. But it's all letterheaded paper. It's got all the boilerplate stuff at the bottom. And the headline is, "Something wild is coming. Stockholm, Sweden, February 12th, 2025. It started as a vision." This is the verbatim from the press release. "It started as a vision. Couldn't Aardvark be connected to 5G? Building on the inspired musings of the previously thought of connected aardvark in the UK, championed by the intrepid explorers Scott Pacino and Ian Morris on their Telecoms.com podcast. This new project from Ericsson, brackets NASDAQ Eric, close brackets, highlights how 5G technology can revolutionise wildlife while monitoring environmental conservation. And so, yeah, all that sort of thing. What do they say? They say something big is coming, something with antlers. So it was Adam that gave me that. Thanks, Adam. That was really cool. And thanks for the exclusive. Keep the exclusive coming.
They bring like a subsea cable in there, something.
Subsea cable?
Are we talking about the...
This is connected wildlife.
That's the sort of thing you should put in a frame.
Oh, so using Svalbard and Aardvark, yes, different things.
Had you got confused with what an aardvark is?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Aardvark's that weird sort of plated mammal that you get.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
You should either pin it up there or put it on your wall.
Yeah, maybe I'll pin it up in here
because
next to that.
That's the sort of thing you look back on in 10 years and go, "Oh,
where's that cartoon from?"
I don't know. Where's that from?
Austin. That's an artist. When we were waiting to get in to see Joe Rogan, did that. It's Pierre, me, Jeff, and Mike, isn't it?
Pierre, can I give this to you then so that we remember to pin it up?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. That's quite enough opening bollocks. So the Ericsson event. I mean, we were all there. Shall we start with you, Ian? Why don't you give us the top
think we should
down?
Start with private enterprise.
Well, we're going to get into that.
Okay, right.
I thought we'd just have big picture before we drill down into the specifics.
Yeah.
So why don't we, the three of us, and I'll just start with you, just because you're used to banging on, and then I'll ask you, Pablo, and then I'll put my 10 cents worth in. Just top line, what you thought of the event, what you learnt from it, that sort of thing.
I mean, it's good in the sense that they have pretty much the whole executive team there, the top management team, except for Boyer. Yeah. Except for Boyer coming the CFO. They have all the heads of the main
You don't want to chat
there.
to the CFO, though, do you?
Well, I mean, that's why he wouldn't come, because it's not appropriate for him to be with analysts and trade journalists. I mean, the FT might want to talk to him.
No offence to CFO, I'm sure he or she. I don't
the
know.
FT probably
person.
would want to talk to him.
Yeah, that's true.
But
I didn't see a lot of mainstream press there.
No, but I don't ever recall seeing a lot of mainstream press. And maybe if they had the mainstream press, they might have people like Ecom, and I can't even remember his name because they've changed CFOs.
The
recently.
CFO.
Yeah, he's a new guy. He's succeeded the guy who'd been doing the job for Carl Melander. He was
Melander, yeah.
And I can't, embarrassingly on the pod, I can't remember the new CFO's name, but
look, I didn't even know if it was a man or a woman. So there we are.
It is a man. Yeah,
he's on
because he's on the earnings calls and. So they've got all the heads of the individual business units, and I think it's really valuable to have. And they're quite good at sort of lining up interviews for you with these people. I mean, you met, I think, a couple of. You probably met.
I met Eric Gudden, the CTO. I met Frederick. I keep wanting to say Ljungberg after the Arsenal player, but he's Jedling, who's the head of the networks division. And then I met someone, I don't know how best to pronounce her name. I think it's Tamsons. Yeah, and her name is ASA, but the first day has got a little Swedish circle above it.
Yeah. I mean, you can only pronounce it properly if you're Swedish, basically.
Yeah, they've got...
It's kind of an O sound, isn't it?
Yeah. There we go. So I met those three. About you, who did you meet?
I met Frederick, I met Per Narvinger, who's head of cloud software and services, and I met Nicholas Herveldop, who's the
well done.
He's sort of the head of
foreign surnames than I am.
He's kind of the head of the bit that we're probably going to talk about a bit later, which is the whole enterprise side. Although he's mainly kind of associated with Vonage because that's the bigger part of that, and he was also very much sort of instrumental in putting together this thing that's now called Aduna, which is this joint venture they've got with a bunch of other operators on the network API side of things. And I didn't really talk to him about the kind of cradle point and that the stuff that sort of how Pablo's more of an expert in. But yeah, the one thing I was going to say before you guys chip in, but I think it's really good you can meet those people.
Definitely.
And then I did my chat with Eric sort of afterwards over a beer anyway, so I also got to sort of talk to him.
No, it's cool they hang around as well.
But I thought
Frederick, I thought his suit was very sharp.
Well, they all look quite snazzy, don't they?
But he's got like a light grey pinstripe.
They all look quite annoyingly healthy and like they go out for long runs.
Yeah, they
only eat fish.
No sign of a beer gut there.
Yeah, but I thought it was good, and they're obviously doing quite well in a market that's not doing quite well. They're the ones that we're going to talk about Nokia later, who've got some struggles in mobile.
They can't be bothered with mobile now.
And I don't really agree with that.
That's being silly.
what I thought it was missing maybe this time, and maybe it wasn't on the enterprise stuff, which I have to admit I missed a lot of because that was when I was having a couple of my meetings. I just didn't see there was a huge amount that was new from last year.
Agreed.
They're still pushing this sort of programmability message and 5G Advanced. They had some new radio units
They
there.
had like 7 new radios or something.
They had new radios.
If you're into radios,
that's funny. I said exactly that in my write-up. I said there were a bunch of new radios, which I'm sure you can read about somewhere else if you're into that sort of thing.
They did, and that's all well and good, but there wasn't like a sort of strategic shift. Last year they made quite a big deal of the.
Well, you expect them to make new radios. That's what they do.
You did, but last year they had this big AT&T deal they just announced, and they were talking about that obviously. But the whole thing there, I remember, was we're moving to a different model now where it's all about programmability and it's about competing in layers of the network instead of taking a geographical zone and selling everything there as you used to do before. And it was a kind of acknowledgement of some of those shifts that you see with Open RAN happening and what it means for their business model. There wasn't any real sort of update on that. It was just kind of more of the same.
Yes.
So apart from showing off,
would you expect it like year on year to really change?
No, I suppose. But all I'm saying is, I'm not saying I expect it. But as a journalist, you always look for something like that because it makes it a bit easier for you, and you don't really want to just write about this box that weighs 19 kilos instead of 22 kilos last year.
And it is an interesting thing comparing the MO of the journalist versus the analyst.
Yeah.
Because we're naturally going to be more. We operate on much shorter time frames, and we're going to be searching for news hooks.
Yeah.
And so it just gets, once you've been a journalist for a while, it's just second nature in your mind where you're turning everything and you're almost automatically thinking, where's the headline? What's the hook? What am I going to write about? What's the thing?
The hook is like clickbait.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, clickbait is how...
We don't like that expression.
Well, but clickbait has its role as an expression, but I think that refers to headlines that aren't
misleading.
They're not properly supported by the body copy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I wrote a headline saying, I don't know,
read here to find out about Ericsson's strategy, and then there's a picture of Kim Kardashian's arse or something.
Well, actually, typically clickbait would be
the other way around.
Yeah, I was about to say clickbait would be the other way around.
That's a very strange, bit. But I'm sure
we're talking about telecom people. I remember.
Fair enough.
But yes, that's what clickbait would be. Is sort of deliberately misleading sensationalist headlines. But I think a sensationalist headline that is supported by the body copy is just a good headline.
Yeah.
That's just best practice. People talk about SEO and all that sort of thing, but really, the best SEO is just writing really good, compelling headlines. I think. Yeah.
Which
Anyway,
is hard to do when you're talking about a radio unit that weighs 3 kilos less.
Do you know what I mean?
Did last year, but
I mean, they had that one time where they had a photo of a blonde woman carrying a radio around to show how light it was.
Well, that at least gave rise to some funny headline opportunities.
Yeah, exactly.
But they didn't even have any photos of women walking around with them this time. So.
No, I mean, is that so much to ask for, Ericsson?
Come on, Ericsson.
Pablo, did you get any like one-to-one briefings, or was it all just the presentations?
No, it was just the presentation. I think the one-on-one were probably more for you guys.
Right.
Yeah.
So I actually bailed out of nearly all of the presentations. Partly because, sorry, Ericsson, I thought they might be a bit boring, but also because I had these 3 briefings that coincided with the presentations, and then also because I wanted to get my thing written up before the evening. Partly just efficiency, partly just journalist competitiveness, getting ahead of the chasing pack, and also partly while it's all still fresh in my mind. So I actually bailed out of a lot of the presentations to write my story, which I managed to write by 6 p.m. that day. So you're the one who sat through all of them. Anything jump out at you from the presentations? Did you have a particular eye on your speciality or what?
I mean, obviously I've been, paying particular attention to anything that was enterprise related. They're like, I mean, going back to your question, I thought it was like a very good event, like, very good way of sort of setting the scene, right? Sort of, that's where we are. Those are our strategic directions,
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, go ahead. Here are, a bunch of our new products. Was it like completely new information? I would say probably more like, refreshing people's memory.
Yeah.
More than anything else. I did like that there were like a bunch of different partners they were like presenting and as part of panels and stuff like that. So it does shows a little bit more of that.
Well, that's the one thing
ecosystem play that
I saw on LinkedIn. People were quite positive about the bit. I sort of came back in and Ossa, whose name I'm going to have mangled.
We'll go with that. We'll go with Ossa. Well, at least we're trying
a panel session on the sort of enterprise 5G stuff with two guys, and I don't really know who they were because they'd already been introduced. And
I don't remember the names. One was from maybe Steven something from Jaguar Land Rover, and then there was another partner from Fujitsu Networks.
Okay.
They deployed a private 5G in one of the factories, so that was sort of why they were discussing that, which is interesting. Found particularly interesting why sort of Fujitsu Network would not try to push sort of Fujitsu, telco gear into the deal.
Point. Yeah.
And
did you get an answer to that question?
No, I didn't get the chance. I asked another question. Don't remember what was it. But yeah, Fujitsu doesn't care too much about private networks. So the integration side, I think it's of Fujitsu looks a little bit more about the market. But it was like it was good.
Sorry to butt in briefly because I actually chatted when I was chatting to Ossa. She brought up the JLR thing.
Mm-hmm. So it's quite a new deal, the JLR thing.
Yeah. It was just a press release this week.
Okay.
And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things she emphasised, and I think her colleagues have emphasised, is the go-to-market strategy, which sounds like a sort of wanky bit of corporate speak. But it actually means...
Ericsson will love you describing it.
Well, no, but I'm about to say why it's not, Ericsson. I'm about to say why it's not, because it actually means... Well, it's just for us journalists. When anything sort of commercial comes up, it always sounds a bit, Anyway, but it's accepting the fact that Ericsson's primary go-to-market has been through the operator channel.
Yeah.
And they accept that they have to develop these other channels. You could to use other corporate speak, verticals or whatever. And maybe that's one of the reasons why you've got someone like Fujitsu involved and other like really big systems integrators, because what they've got is that commercial relationship with other industries. And then one of the ways in which Ericsson is going to develop this go-to-market sort of evolved, diversified strategy they were talking about is through partnerships like that. That's just a thought off the top of my head.
Yeah, sort of in go-to-market strategy 101 for private networks, you want to have those different partners. Now, traditionally, Ericsson, particularly among the big telco vendors, excluding sort of the Chinese ecosystem, which is very different, Ericsson has been pushing a lot with telcos or wanting to push a lot with telcos from when they started. Now, of course, it needs to diversify a little bit because telcos have a few issues here and there in providing private 5G. So they're looking at integrators, they're looking at reseller models, sort of building up from cradle point. There's like tier 2, tier 3, which I don't think is going to work. But sort of that's the idea. And
why?
Too complicated to sell.
Well, wasn't this their thing a few years ago? And I've lost track of this a bit, but they had quite a different approach from Nokia, where they said we'll only work through the service providers because we don't want to compete with we don't want to come out of the loop. Customers.
Yeah, so Ericsson.
And then people started buying spectrum that the telcos weren't involved with. And
at first Ericsson was like, we're only gonna go with telco partners, and then they started kind of changing a little bit definition. We're only gonna go like with service providers. Comes a little bit more of a vague term. Now, they're still working a lot with telcos, but I think they're understanding a little bit more that they need to look at those other options as well. Like system integrators, at the end of the day, are in a much better place than telcos to deliver this type of sort of complex deals. But one thing, though, that I want to highlight, at least from my point of view, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, it's an interesting deployment, but it's nothing special in the sense it's... a private 5G deployment.
Are you talking about the Jaguar Land Rover thing specifically? Right.
JLR. Yeah. It's good. Anything that we see that shows there is momentum is good, but I don't see it as something that is like really a watershed moment or anything. It's just, okay, we got this deal. And
I'll tell you my thoughts on, it's more broadly on what you're talking about as the watershed moment, and then there's other little buzzwords and cliches that come in, like killer app and that sort of thing. When I wrote my piece up, I sort of formed my, I was saying earlier, us journalists were always thinking about the headlines and the narrative theme. And I formed my narrative theme quite early, just from my first conversation, which was with Eric Akudden, the CTO, where I spoke to him just before he presented. And I was getting that sort of deja vu all over again feeling of like, yeah, I've heard this fucking story before. But then I thought, all right, there's one part of me where I thought, fair play to them. They're sticking with their story. They're getting skeptical vibes from people like me and Ian and whoever else. But they're sticking with it. And my conclusion was twofold why they're sticking with it. The negative one is they got fuck all option. They made their bed, now they got to sleep in it. But the other one is, and I chose to give them the benefit of the doubt in my angle, which is to say, well, look, they're betting on the future. They stress that they think their business is quite solid and stable in what they currently do, which is all those radios and all that stuff. And they're just betting a lot on the future. And actually, I can see why they're betting on the future, because there's no growth in the present.
There is growth in that bit that you're talking about that OSA sort of runs.
Yeah, so I'm talking about selling RAN gear to operators.
Yeah, I mean,
which is their core business.
That's the core business, but the smaller bit that we're talking about at the moment, the kind of cradle points. So I'm guessing this deal, because as I say, I missed some of this session, but the JLR deal is based quite heavily on the use of cradle point routers, is it, in a kind of factory environment?
I'm look it up.
No, I don't think cradle point.
It's not a cradle point arrangement at all.
No, it's like a traditional private 5G type of deployment.
And what would be the difference with cradle point? Are they in a very specific niche area, cradle point, or?
So cradle point per se doesn't necessarily need to play on the private network space. So in fact, they played a lot on sort of the public safety type of verticals. It's also very sort of a US centric, market, that the one that they have, and it is usually like a lot of the public network stuff, pretty much.
Okay,
is not really focused on private network, and that's also because of the different size of the market.
So it's more like a slice of the public network is what they're doing, or
no? The critical point is like the device, and it connects to the public network, whatever
right.
it is. There's no need for slice, nothing like that. Yeah. But my understanding is that this was like the solution was probably EP5G, Ericsson private 5G.
Yeah.
Deployed for the enterprise, was serving. I think they mentioned a work-related use case, or like sort of data gathering, like nothing too fancy. But I did ask if the network was like performing enough or high performing enough to then move into sort of those OT and industrial applications, because they mentioned, we got the anchor use case, then we're gonna have like additional use case, and eventually move into those more like hardcore industrial use cases.
Yeah.
And apparently, based on what they said, the network is like strong enough that it can move in that without needing to sort of do significant upgrades or anything of the sort.
Okay.
So it's a good story. Like don't get me wrong, it's just nothing. Really...
I completely concede your point, and the only reason I went off my tangent to talk about me for a change is because I think it is incremental, and I think that's why I went on the tangent I did. Every year I've gone, yeah, all right, great. You've got one other tiny little use case, but how much does it move the needle? How profound is it? So I agree with you on that. And then I just thought what I'd do is just try and faithfully represent what their plan is. Whether or not it will come off is another matter.
I was just going to say, what are they? I mean, it's a factory environment, but what are they using? Because you were saying it doesn't seem like it's that game changing. I mean, I think when we think about 5G maybe being used in enterprise use cases, this partly ties in with some of the network API stuff, but you start to think about some weird and wacky and more futuristic type stuff maybe that involves XR or whatever, but we're not talking about anything like that.
No, absolutely. This is just I'm pretty sure it's just connecting.
It's just a connectivity thing, getting rid of the cables that you would have had before. Basically.
I think that was one of the quarter headlines was like cutting the copper.
Exactly. I've got that came up in. I've got the press release up, and one of their 2 bullets is JLR is on a mission to quote cut the copper.
And why would they do it with private 5G rather than doing it with? Juniper Mist or something, and having a Wi-Fi sort of 6 or whatever.
That came up with OSA.
Did it? You can tell me what she said
then. I went something along the lines of, why are we only talking about this with 5G? Couldn't you do it with 4G or Wi-Fi or stuff before?
Yeah.
And I'm going to paraphrase because I didn't.
Wi-Fi is ubiquitous, so that's the big one to me.
I'm going to paraphrase because I didn't take notes or record. Well, I might have recorded it, but I haven't got the recording to hand. It's basically the security, the robustness, the ubiquity. It's just a superior, according to what I was told, it's just a much superior connection to 5G to both Wi-Fi and to 4G.
Right.
And with, we always take the piss about the low latency flavour of 5G, but that's a factor as well.
You need to prod me because we always hear this argument, and we never really speak to people in the Wi-Fi community. And in the run up to MWC,
so we had Jussi on, didn't we?
I don't want to say on the pod in case interviews get cancelled, but I'm supposed to be meeting someone fairly significant at a company that does that sort of thing.
Right,
it would be a good thing for me to remember to sort of say that we always get this argument about private 5G being so much better in terms of guarantees and security and what it can do, but I'm pretty sure you could go and talk to the guys like from Cisco and companies like that who are doing, or Juniper doing Wi-Fi for an enterprise market environment, who would say, well, actually Wi-Fi 7.
Well, don't ask me. We've got the expert on it. Go ahead, Pablo.
Yeah, throwing my 2 cents on the table. Depending who you're talking to, they're going to say they have the best tech, right?
Yeah.
That's obviously the case. Based on what I read and what I've been discussing, so with Wi-Fi 7, sort of the gap, if you want, is narrowing.
Okay.
I think probably the most simple distinction that you can make is that at the end of the day, you still need more Wi-Fi access point compared to private 5G access point.
Just in terms of range and capacity.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And the performance that you will get with a private 5G is stable no matter how many devices you add. To a certain level, of course. But, if you have like 10 or 100, okay.
And we've all been in, you might not have, but we've all been in
experience.
press events where the Wi-Fi just failed because it suddenly wasn't expecting all these people to go on it.
Yeah.
I've been in Cafe Nero with the Wi-Fi as well. I wasn't expecting that many people to go on it.
It's like, Wi-Fi can be good, but then, the more stuff you add, the more it struggles. And then again, if you need to have like 100 Wi-Fi access point and you can have like 5 cellular, you get that sort of optimization potential in cost. Yeah, cost is different, but then when you're thinking about, laying all the cables, blah, 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 whatever is needed. So that's one of the points. But what I disagree with you and with the Ericsson team is that private 5G is significantly better than private LTE because
It is, or it isn't?
Yeah, for me it isn't. It is better,
right?
But it's very difficult to prove specifically how much better it is.
I see. That's interesting.
So if you look at from a use case perspective, what they're currently doing in that deployment can be supported by private LTE.
Right.
So private 5G, I imagine, provides incrementally better performances, but it's not like
it's not a game changer.
No, it's not like moving from 10 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds, or the other way around in this case.
Not too different from the situation in the consumer market. The average consumer isn't going to notice a difference.
Yeah.
Well, that was part of my pushback.
From a good 4G network to
exactly.
a bad 5G one.
That was kind of what prompted that answer from her, if I remember rightly, when I was chatting to her, because, of course, in the intervening time I got pissed, so I can't be totally sure of my recollection.
That's good work.
I'm quite impressed I remember the event at all, if I'm honest. And I was going, 5G is not that much of an upgrade on 4G, is it? Was my sort of provocative opening gambit, and so that's what kind of elicited that response.
Yeah.
To be fair, most deployment probably are still on private LTE. Most private networks,
right,
still on LTE.
How do you assess that? Because that market itself, private 5G, and how it's developing. Based on, say, your expectations 2 or 3, because it's good to ask analysts this sort of thing because they come out with forecasts and they sort of wonder how it's going to go. But if you were to look back,
where's your PowerPoint?
When we first started chatting about private 5G, which is a few years ago now, and where it is now, what's your assessment of how it's gone, and how does Ericsson sort of fit into that space? How's it doing, I guess, in that market environment?
I think it's doing fairly well, Ericsson. They have some interesting strategies back. So, for instance, bringing the neutral host, I don't know if you guys, listen to that part of the presentation, sort of alongside private networks is very interesting as a strategic idea. I'm a little bit skeptical on really how much synergy you can drive from one or the other. But, I believe they see a lot of synergies, otherwise it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So kind of cross-pollination, cross-selling between private 5G and neutral hosts. So we'll see how that goes.
My understanding of neutral host is just taking it literally at face value, which is it's an access point, but who you buy the connectivity from could be any number of people. Why are you making the distinction between private 5G and neutral host in this? I don't fully understand.
Because private 5G, I give you like the round the core to the enterprise.
Okay. So
and the enterprise is the only one that, connects SIM cards, connects whatever they want. It's only for them. In a neutral scenario, let's say in the US, you would have people that are using from, T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, and can use the network as well.
Right. So, yeah. Okay. So it's the difference between a more bespoke solution and a more sort of...
And a solution that allows,
multi-purpose.
SIM from the outside if you want.
Yes.
To also use the
Right.
network.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I'm struggling a little bit personally to see how they overlap, in the sense, again, if I'm responsible for my factory floor, I don't really care, about people coming from the outside. Coming from the outside, and I'm Italian, so I do need to move my hands.
That's quite all right. You go for it. I don't think you knocked any cameras, mate. You're good.
No.
It's all crap old equipment anyway, isn't it?
So one of them's quite new because he got the other one nicked.
Yeah.
If I break it, you have to replace with new ones, so there's silver lining
you have
there.
Stephen Carter to answer to if you do that.
No, I hope so. I can try.
How are they doing? So you think Ericsson's doing quite well in that market, but yeah,
fairly well. I mean, they're doing okay, like similarly to some of the other big players.
I mean, are there real trailblazers? Is there anybody who's like, oh my god, what they're doing in private 5G is unbelievable? I mean, for a long time, Nokia was sort of seen as the guy to watch. But
I would say Nokia is still the head of the pack.
Okay,
So I didn't even know that. Right.
Yeah, they were. They made a big deal about it a few years ago, and then they're sort of a bit quieter about the private 5G stuff recently.
So they were the one that sort of started bringing sort of this whole attention, right? The first one of the big vendors, because the market was already there. It was just not cool, not trendy. There was no spectrum.
Yeah.
So Nokia started, creating the noise and creating effectively this the momentum that we're seeing. Now they are still ahead, I think, in terms of customers, in terms of strategy and everything. But what they're doing is like they are pivoting quite a bit for private networks into more of sort of wanting to be an industrial type of vendors, and then probably connected with some AI opportunities and things that we're going to discuss later on.
We've got this far without saying AI. I'm so impressed.
And are there like players that are outside the big ones that we always think of?
I got a receipts here.
First things first, I was saying
I agree with you. I think we need to get our priorities right. Are there kind of companies that have come along that, because the main RAN market, which I sort of write about more and Scott does as well, is still very much dominated by Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, obviously. But does it look a bit different in private 5G? Is there a bit more, an opportunity there for players that we're not used to sort of hearing about?
I mean, the big guys are the same. Then, again, geopolitics are kind of dictating where you are and what you can and cannot do. I would say...
All we can do is buy me T-bone steaks. That's all they can do in England.
Helping you getting into the market.
Getting into the fat market.
There are some smaller companies that have been quite interesting. Celona is the classic example because from the beginning they were like trying to create a private experience that's similar to the Wi-Fi experience.
Right.
So, you can see a little bit more of the startups, small companies or specific companies that are doing this. You have HP, acquire Athonet.
Yep.
And again, their sort of mantra is like private 5G plus Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi plus private 5G. So it's
Best
slightly...
of both worlds sort of thing.
It's like, we can do, both of them and we can decide what's the best thing for you.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different, but then again, at the end of the day, when you're thinking, okay, the really big guys are pretty much the usual suspects because, Nokia is probably the biggest one.
So pleased you said the usual suspects because I was going to make a joke about your surname and I would have screwed it up.
The wrong film.
Yeah, because I was thinking of a fictional character called Rollo Tomassi, so same surname as you, and I was thinking usual suspects because I pictured Kevin Spacey, but it's actually LA Confidential, isn't it? And he's like this almost fictional character who's like the ultimate behind the scenes baddie.
Yeah, do you know? Because this is off on a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, well, we do that
back quickly. But I told Ray about this last night because he was like, "Are you doing the podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, we're getting Pablo on if you remember Pablo." And he's like, "Yeah, we were joking that his name's a bit like Rollo Tomassi
there we go.
from The Usual Suspects." And Ray sort of like laughed, but then I thought afterwards, for a film buff like that, not to know.
Maybe he's being polite.
He might, no,
Not Ray.
No, Ray would just have said, no, you've got the wrong film.
No,
It's
I
like
just had it.
But
What was he called? Kaiser Sose. I was confusing Rolo Tomasi with Kaiser Sose. So there we are. Sorry, Rolo, for interrupting, but it's only because you said The Usual Suspects that it suddenly made me think of it. Pablo, of course.
Yes. No, I'm not sure what point I was making before this digression.
We were talking about other players in.
Athernet, they're Italian, aren't they? Or they were before they.
They were
Italian,
before.
I guess. But are they? What differentiates them? Because people used to talk about them in like. They're really good. Their tech's really good, and what they're doing is quite unique. But why would they be different from an Ericsson or a Nokia? And they're obviously quite small and don't have the same. Well, they didn't before they got taken over. Have the same kind of funding ability as these.
So from a pure technical perspective, probably you should ask someone that is much better than me on the tech side to tell you why.
So, mate. It's all relative.
Sort of why their 5G core or their LTE core is better suited for this. But in sort of very, very top level, their product was created for this market.
Right. Yeah.
And they've been in this market for a long time before it was trendy. And that allowed them to effectively having a product that was like well tailored to serve this, and they learned the lessons of deploying in the utility sector rather than in the defense industry, whatever you want. And so you get that experience, and you get something that is like purpose built. A lot of what the big vendors are doing has been, you take your public network and you shrink it.
Right. This is what Athernet said to remember, because I met Athernet at the Ryder Cup. It's quite an interesting place to meet.
Yeah. I'm really gutted. I don't know why I missed out on that.
Yeah, I went. So
maybe I wasn't invited.
The Ryder Cup was in Rome.
But that sounded like a great gig.
Last year, the year before, I think. And I went with HP because they'd done all the kind of Wi-Fi points, and Athernet had done some.
The private 5G alongside the Wi-Fi.
And Athernet.
Did you get invited to that?
No, I think I don't get invited to as you guys.
There weren't any
analysts get ripped off on jollies, don't they?
No, there weren't any analysts at that. It was just journalists, I'm pretty sure. But they
do you get any jollies at all? Do you ever get taken out for dinner and stuff?
Like out of the blue, absolutely not. During industry analyst events, yes, but I think it's
interesting, isn't it?
I think I got the wrong career. It was, you guys are definitely having
it was a good event
the
because
better life.
It was in Rome, which is like pretty much anywhere in Italy is pretty good to go to, I think.
Yeah.
And it was really sunny, even though it was late in the year. It was like brilliant weather and
Which bit of Italy are you from originally, Pablo?
It's a city 1 hour south of Milan called Piacenza.
Right. I think I've heard of it through the football. So it's still northern Italy.
Yeah. Still northern Italy. Yeah. We used to have like a decent team. Like we're talking about 30 years ago. We were playing in Serie A.
That's when it used to be.
at the time.
I mean, I'm presuming you're much younger than me, but there was a time where Serie A was on telly quite a lot. It was on Channel 4. And so we used to watch Serie A.
90s, that was the best.
And that was like, that was when it was like AC Milan with Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten and all that. Rijkaard.
Oh, this is the 80s.
Basically all the Dutch.
Yeah, that was the 80s with the AC Milan with the Dutch.
Athernet were at the Ryder
Sorry,
Cup,
I interrupted.
But I mean, on a kind of regional basis, is there anywhere where private 5G is cut? Because I get the feeling that it's not doing that great in Europe. It's a bigger deal in like China and the US than.
So it's interesting that you mentioned China because China has a slightly different. I'm using a very narrow definition of private 5G.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. I know what you're going to.
It's like you get all the stuff just for an enterprise. Let's keep it nice and simple. China has the broad definition where anything sort of hybrid or network slicing is still called private 5G. And in fact, I think they're counting like 50,000 deployment customers, whatever you want to call them, which is very different compared to any other country where you would never have those type of numbers.
Right.
So that is because for different reasons. Like on one side you have like the whole big push of the telcos. There is no spectrum, although it seems that the government will start releasing spectrum for the enterprise. At least they are considering it
in China.
In China as well, yeah. So that would be interesting to see, because right now you need to work with the telco, because of the spectrum. If the spectrum becomes available, it would be really interesting to see if telcos manage to sort of keep that sort of strength, that momentum that they have, or they're kind of gonna be losing it a little bit to other players. But that creates a very different market. There's a market that you can't really, you can see what I always say about China and Huawei and ZTE. It's good to see what's possible but it's not replicable.
Right.
And I know that lately, in a few, I think, investor relations call, Ericsson was mentioning, oh, this is happening in China.
Yeah.
And I was like, why are you comparing yourself with China? The UK is never going to have that type of environment, or even the US. So it's never going to get that sort of speed, that support from the government.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter what happens there. You can see, okay, there's great innovation, but the business model is so much different than anywhere else in the world that doesn't make it replicable.
Has the issue of spectrum, with it being awarded directly to people like, I don't know, BASF or whatever it might be in Germany, or whoever's gone and decided to sort of bid for this industrial spectrum, has that made a big difference in terms of, because I think the concern is that the operators, if this was going to be a really big revenue opportunity on the network side, that they would then kind of lose out and maybe not be needed. And some of the telcos, I remember saying, I think, well, we're not just about the spectrum.
Thanks.
I mean, we do have the spectrum, but it's not just about that. There's other things we can contribute. But since this started to happen a few years ago, has there been signs of, in markets where spectrum has been awarded directly to non-telcos, that the telcos are not really involved anymore in those opportunities, and companies are doing it directly with an Ericsson or a Nokia or an Athernet, and
a lot of companies are doing directly or with system integrators, or potentially you can do it sort of via telco, and then the telco is working with an SI. But I'll take your question and I sort of bring it back a little bit, and I'm gonna make a lot of friends at GSMA. Once you release spectrum, once you release spectrum for the enterprise, that's when the market starts.
Right.
And as the market starts, then you're gonna get telcos also starting looking at like, oh yeah, we can do this and we can do that. How much effort they actually put, we can discuss. But if you're thinking about the biggest markets, excluding China, you have like Germany, you have the US, you have UK, France, Japan, which are all countries where there is spectrum available for the enterprise, because that's sort of the first roadblock.
Yeah.
If there is no spectrum, telcos just don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you say spectrum available for enterprise, you mean dedicated?
Yeah.
Was dedicated, shared, whatever.
But I mean, we all know
CBRS
about spectrum auctions, and we know that, like with 5G, maybe that's another advantage in favour of 5G versus 4G. Although you could argue the spectrum's obviously not necessarily unique to the wireless technology. But obviously 5G's got more spectrum thanks to the mid-band auctions and all that sort of thing. But when you hear about these auctions, and Ian, you're probably about to correct me, I don't often think that there's bits of the auction that are dedicated entirely to enterprise.
It's not the same auction. It's not the same auction. So what Germany's a good example, and I don't know if you remember this, but Timotheus Höttges, the boss of DT, made a big fuss about 100 megahertz, I think, of 3.5 gigahertz spectrum had been sort of set aside for industrial.
Okay.
For an industrial auction.
I've forgotten that, but I believe you.
You award it and it gets used on a very local basis in like a campus.
Oh, it is coming back to me now. Yeah.
But he was saying, no, we need that because we can't then provide the best 5G services, and we should be doing a network slice on top, and it should be that kind of model.
And who buys this enterprise?
Volkswagen, people
whoever.
like that.
Yeah. So it's the enterprises themselves who tend to buy it.
Yeah, but it's a commoner thing than just in Germany. I mean, Paolo was saying there's quite a few countries doing it now.
Yes, probably would say, don't quote me on the numbers, but I would say like 40 countries that probably have spectrum that is available.
Right.
And a lot are looking into providing spectrum. And also, once you provide the spectrum, then as a regulator, you can say, okay, is this working? Do I need to improve it or change it or add more spectrum, whatever it is? And the US is also a good example with CBRS, and then they released CBRS, I think 2.0 is called, something like that, which slightly modified the way that CBRS was structured to begin with. But you can clearly see that is the essential element to get the market started.
And it's a really valuable commodity spectrum, of course.
Yeah, it is. And I understand from a telco point of view, their life depends on spectrum, right? So I understand why they want to oppose that as much as they can.
Yeah.
Then, sometimes they win that battle. Sometimes in the German example, you have a lot of big industrial guys that probably can flex their muscles as well as the telcos.
All public policy is about balancing a bunch of vested interests, really. A lot of people don't think of it that way. They think it should be more pure and more top-down. But from my understanding of how politics works, it's all horse trading between vested interests. You look at somewhere like the States, where they rely so much on enormous campaign contributions to do whatever silly fucking marketing campaigns they do. And it's all, at the end of that, they've got to pay off all these various vested interests.
They do. I mean, the stuff you were talking about in China, the network slicing, sort of, they call it private 5G, but it's a slice on a public network. But is that happening, in the markets that we can observe more easily and get more insights on because it's not as closed off to us? Is it easy to kind of compare somebody doing it that way with somebody doing it the way it was shown at the Ericsson event, where you're actually sort of building a dedicated network and it's not a slice? And are there kind of attractions of either one from what you can do service-wise? Or
so outside of China, network slicing is a much earlier stage, and
right.
we can discuss why. It's like you need 5G SA, to get sort of a bit.
China's the most advanced globally on that, is it?
Yeah. But I think for everything you can say, most things at least,
is it?
In the telecom space, that they're like.
Oh, that's so big.
Their 5G rollout from the outset was standalone.
They were all over it. Oh, it's standalone straight up.
Yeah, standalone are like very wide coverage. So it's very early stage for network slicing. There are some interesting initiatives. There are some trials, some offerings. Probably top of my mind, and Ericsson, there was like T-Mobile, right? T-Mobile US.
Yeah.
And they were mentioning, their network slicing, the T-Priority, which is their offering for public safety. That's a good example of something that is happening outside of China, which is interesting, and it shows the opportunity for the network slicing technology. Now, for me, there's a lot of confusion because you're not going to go after the same customers with network slicing and private 5G. And a lot of times, and I also see that with sort of network APIs, you see people that think of, okay, I'm going to go inside the factory with the slice or with network APIs type of stuff. And it's like, no, you don't even reach inside the factory. Like, there's no point in thinking that that's
because the coverage isn't good enough.
Think about like a big factory.
Yeah.
You're not going to even have signal, right?
Yeah.
And
you've certainly got to have small cells.
Yeah.
Or whatever within there. Yeah.
And that's sort of the basic step why sometimes, not always, but sometimes you need a private networks because the public network is not designed to enter that factory.
Yeah.
What this is a little bit tangential. And sorry, and you were about to ask something. So
well, can I nip in very quickly?
Go ahead.
It's an easy one to answer, but the network slicing issue that came up years ago to do with if you carve out these specific slices, you're affecting the actual people who are on the main kind of slice. That's not a slice; they're just the general service. Is that receded, that concern, or are people still?
No, it's still there.
Still there, it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's also one of the reason why when telcos talk about hybrid, for instance, hybrid network is a good example, right? They say, okay, you don't need dedicated because we can do hybrid. We can use some of our infrastructure and resource from the public side. But it's not as simple as that, right? It's not necessarily just, okay, flip a switch and you have the hybrid network. The public network is designed to do one thing, and that is consumer market.
Yeah.
So it's designed for downlink rather than uplink. It's like very simple examples, but that's the idea. If you're an enterprise and you want to connect 100 cameras all uplink, it's not that straightforward to say it's going to be hybrid,
I mean, it seems to me, like all things being equal and money being no object, a private network is a no-brainer for any environment. And in a bit, I'll steer this back to Ericsson, any environment where you want a large degree of connectivity, both involving people and machines. It seems like a no-brainer to me. Am I missing something?
But for certain vertical, yes. It's never going to move quickly, right? Because every vertical is slightly different. And then, again, if you're thinking, okay, I need the coverage that is, let's say across half of the UK, a private network is not going to...
No.
It's going to be like too expensive.
But within a confined environment.
Within a confined environment.
Why isn't it? Because I think we talked about this a bit before we came in, but if you look at the Ericsson Enterprise Solutions, or whatever they call it, business group, a lot of that is now accounted for by Vonage, which we could talk about a little bit after this.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Sure.
But there was a couple of things I did want to say about that.
Vonage or Aduna?
Well, yeah, both of them.
Well, now they're distinct things, isn't it?
But parking those parking those to one side for a minute and looking at the rest of the enterprise, which is more the stuff we're talking about, and it includes things like Cradlepoint as well. I think if you go back, 5-6 years, they would probably have expected that to be a bigger share of their, their kind of company revenues. And is it just that people don't see the use cases there yet to have this stuff? Is it competition from Wi-Fi? It just doesn't seem to be developing as fast as...
The boring answer is probably all of the above in the sense that on one side you are overestimating what you can do with 5G. You're overestimating how bad Wi-Fi is, or may not be. You're overestimating how fast enterprises will just jump on the idea of 5G. Like, if I invest in Wi-Fi, then I'm not gonna touch that for probably like 10 years.
Yeah.
Replacement, whatever.
So it's just inertia.
It takes a long time for an enterprise to make big changes, right?
Yeah.
And industrial enterprises are very conservative. They probably have like technology are like 20 years old and they're happy it works. Why touching it? And from a telco ecosystem, there have always been a little bit of that hubris of like, we're bringing something that we say it's better, and therefore they're gonna want it. It's gonna fly off the shelf. And when you're thinking about the pure connectivity piece of 5G versus some of the industrial Ethernet stuff that they're using, 5G is not better,
right?
By any means.
Yeah,
it's wireless, so it's flexible, but performance-wise, it's not better.
That's always the thing that gets thrown in, isn't it? The wireless side of it, get rid of the cables in the factory. But I'm kind of wondering whether, because I only ever hear that from the guys who are trying to sell wireless. It's like, does that bother you that much? The
but
cables,
isn't the argument for wireless obvious? It's the same reason why we like wireless in other situations. Because there's no fucking wires.
Yeah, but if you don't want wires when you're walking around and catching a bus, because you couldn't do it. But in a factory, I'm kind of wondering how much of a concern
so you've
this
got
cabling
all these,
issue is.
as things get even more automated, and you've got all these robots. And I know industrial robots are quite commonplace already. But, there will be, and don't ask me to name the specific use cases because I can't. But there will be more and more examples where having everything connected yields advantages. And in fact, I'll refer back to that when I get back to what my coverage of the Ericsson event was. So I can completely see why the argument for wireless stands to reason. I mean, the simplest argument for wireless is if all things were equal, if the bandwidth was the same, if the reliability was the same, if everything was the same, you'd always go wireless over wired. So that's the simplest argument for wireless to me.
Yeah, but wired has better performance.
Yes, totally. And obviously, all things being equal, they're not all equal. I completely concede that point. But the closer you can get, and then it also comes to a matter of trade-offs. Okay, let's say it's 75% as good, but the trade-offs are the flexibility.
Yeah, but would you have fixed wireless access in your house?
I wouldn't, because I don't need it, because I've got the thing.
Because fixed is
But
better.
if I lived in the Brecon Beacons, I would.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying, is that if you're in a factory environment and you can get better performance by having some cabling,
I completely concede that point.
Does it bother you that much? I imagine there are
how
some
much stuff can you cable up?
Cabling.
When you've got stuff that's mobile. Let's imagine a world where in future we've got these little drones within factories, where obviously they can't be attached to cables or something like that. I don't know.
But that's sort of where the complexity and the delays in the market comes from, because sort of the telco world was saying, you're going to change your factory. You can change it much more quickly and you can produce different things. But then depending on what you're producing, you are changing your factory line maybe once every 10 years, or maybe you're changing it once every quarter. So you cannot say that you really need that flexibility unless you know that every quarter you need to change something in your factory line. Because in that case, big advantage of wireless. But honestly, I was talking with some enterprises and some vendors, and they were, pitching this, reconfigurable factory floor. And I was like, okay, how often have you changed that so far? And they're like, oh no, we are yet to change our production line.
Right.
Yeah. I was like, oh.
So it's great that it's so reconfigurable, but you're not actually reconfiguring it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you build these things and they're there for a long time, yeah? And you make that investment. You don't want to, it's the same as switching in the macro network, I guess, to another vendor or something. If you're a telco, you're kind of cautious about doing that kind of thing because you've got to swap all your stuff out. So,
if you don't mind, I want to. One thing I thought of.
You were going to ask something that you said was very tangential, but and then
I will do that. But I also want to just mark this little inflection point because I want to move it back to Ericsson and throw my giving them the benefit of the doubt argument at you two and see how that lands.
So we're still at the first question then.
We sort of are. Well, I think we've done.
An hour in.
Yeah, we're an hour in. Well, this is after last week where we managed to get about an hour and 20 minutes out of a single fucking data point that Huawei come out with, which was just their top line revenue from last year. I mean, the only thing I thought, I get a lot of feedback from people, and I probably get more feedback to say that we're too long than I get feedback to say I love how long it is. But I'm a bit stubborn, partly because I'm a consumer of long-form podcasts like Joe Rogan myself. And partly because, obviously you've got to have some time constraints, but, the conversation we've had is so flowing and unstructured that I think that's what podcasts are all about. If it was much more structured and it was like, okay, Pablo, question 1, Pablo 2, question 3, all right, cheers, see you later. That's just a different kind of thing. I'm not saying that doesn't have value either. But that's not a podcast as far as I'm concerned.
Slightly anyway. Unique differentiator, Scott.
Well, it's certainly not unique, but it's unique to podcasts. I'm just leaning into the podcast format.
I think the question 1 to 3 is more like sort of an analyst mentality type of thing.
And it's like a structured interview.
Answer, go to the point. And
that's when you're drinking brimstone and someone's got a fire up your ass.
But having said all that, when I was reflecting on last week's pod, where the final segment, we had about 10 minutes left, throughout which Pierre was rolling his eyes at how long we were going. I thought, okay, we need to have perhaps a little bit more discipline than I allow in the first segment. And so I'm going to try and cut it off after an hour. But to answer your point, we're an hour in, but we've basically done two segments. When I publish it, I'm going to say the 3 things are going to be Ericsson, private wireless or private 5G. Probably private wireless would be better, do you think?
Yeah.
It's private wireless. Like Nokia tends to call it private wireless.
I think because we've certainly haven't spoken about 5G. We've spoken
calling
about
Ericsson private wireless, and maybe a little bit like
Ericsson's going to be private 5G.
Yeah, well, I think it is private wireless because we've spoken about LTE and Wi-Fi as well, and for that matter, the pros and cons of wireless versus wired. So that's probably where I'll go. So that'll be the first 2 segments. So that buys us a bit more time, but I'm still going to try and be a little bit disciplined. And I'm saying. How long into it do you say we are?
What's your take then on the Ericsson event?
So before that, I was going to ask you a quick one. Do you know what? I might not do it because it's a massive tangent and we could go on for ages.
Just tell us your question.
I'll ask it.
Building expectation.
Well,
and
it is because
creating
it's a completely different topic. I was going to ask you, when you were telling me, which Ian was much more aware of than I was, how much more advanced China is in a lot of this stuff. I was going to ask you why. So you can see what I mean. It's a pretty fucking big question.
Because the government goes, you got to do this.
You think it's a top-down government?
And all they haven't awarded spectrum.
Is that what you think too, Pablo?
Yeah, it's like so you have incentivized on the sort of the supply and the demand side.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're an enterprise, you want to be as highly digital as you can because you get sort of the sponsor from the government. And if you are like a vendor, you want to push that because, again, the government wants that. I mean, you have the plan. I'm not sure if it's still like the set sail plan or something like that it was called. But, you have the country has
more allegorical than
certain targets that they want to achieve. And benefits for achieving those plans.
Yeah.
And that's why in that sort of environment, as I said, it's a very different business model from anywhere else in the world.
Right. And it is an interesting one. I'm not necessarily arguing in favour of it, but I've even heard Western politicians go, the advantage China's got is they can make fucking plans. Whereas we've got this constant electoral cycle going on and changes of power and all that sort of thing. I still wouldn't argue in favour of what effectively is a dictatorship, which I will retract if I ever go to China and they challenge me on that. I got another thing. I got Richard Fogg texting me today. He was listening to the pod where I was confusing Mohammed bin Salman's abbreviation and calling him IBS. And he was pissing himself laughing at that, which I'll stress again for the record.
Was that last week?
I think so, or maybe he's catching up. Which I'll stress again for the record in case I go to Saudi Arabia, was just an honest mistake and I meant nothing by it. But I mean that if you're not burdened by democratic due process, you can make bigger plans, can't you? And you can also tell the rest of the country what to fucking do. And that seems to be an example of where it pays off. Anyway, I'll nip that tangent in the bud. I'll tell you my take on the Ericsson thing. So I'm trying to find my story so you can find my headline. And this was sort of written on the fly. Like I said, I actually published it before we started having drinks with them at the end of that day. I said, my headline was, Ericsson explains its calm approach to risky business. I'm not necessarily in love with the headline, but it's the best I could come up with at the time. The reason I said risky business, partly in reference to that Tom Cruise film. But
they'll know that.
Yeah. No, and I could tell they all love a bit
That's
of...
quite an old film now, though.
They all like a bit of early Tom Cruise.
1984 with Rebecca De Mornay.
It was a fucking good film. I love that film. It was quite saucy as well.
Yeah, I know that's why you like it.
That wasn't the only reason, but that is something.
You saw it like me when you were about 11 or something.
That is something that stayed in my early adolescent recollection of it. That's for sure. Is what especially Eric and Frederick were talking to me a lot about, which is I wrote most of it just from talking to them, and then I added a couple of paragraphs after I spoke to Åsa. Is they're like going, yeah, we're making a lot of bets. You know, Vonage was a massive bet. In the short term, it clearly hasn't paid off. They had to write down 2/3 of the value of the acquisition and all that sort of thing. Vonage is a big bet. You could even argue that private 5G, as we've just been discussing it, is a big bet. There's a few other big bets. And they're basically going, look, and they're basically conceding. And again, they didn't explicitly say this, but me reading between the lines is they're conceding that their current sort of basic business model is fine, but there's not much growth in it, i.e. selling radios to operators. So where's the growth coming from? And I think we can all agree it's not necessarily that obvious where the growth is coming from. So everyone's having to speculate, they're having to bet. And where I chose to give them the benefit of the doubt is to say, well, at least they're having a bet. And it might none of it might pay off.
I'm not sure it's a good bet.
Yeah, well, there we are. Well, why didn't you? So that's my angle.
I'll say it's a very safe bet in the sense that everything that they do kind of brings back to their one thing that they're good at.
Yeah.
Okay, mobile networks, we know how to do the run and the core and everything in one way or another is all about that. If you look any other big network vendor like Nokia, Huawei, ZTE, they're branching out way more than them.
Yeah.
And you can argue whether it's like too much of a risk, uncertainties, blah, blah, blah. But Ericsson is like so much dependent on sort of the mobile network to...
It is. I mean, that would be my take. I mean, I think that, I 100% agree with that. I think they've become a 5G company under Boye Ekholm. You could be critical of when Hans Vestberg was there, that they kind of lost their...
So please mention that, because I've got a paragraph of my own writing I'm going to read that's consistent with what you're saying now.
They had their... under Hans Vestberg, that you could say, yes, they sort of took their eye off the ball on 4G, and Huawei came in and kind of, they were eclipsed by Huawei really in Europe. R&D spending fell massively. They went into things like TV and cloud hardware even. And one of the first things he did when he joined was like, we need to get this company focused on the thing that it's always been associated with and does best. And he did a really good job of that, clearly. And sort of people were worried about it at the time. I mean, one of the most interesting things in their last earnings call was him saying people were worried about the future of Ericsson. It was like hard to get them to sign deals because they're not sure you're going to be around in 10 years' time.
Who said that? A question? Oh, he said it.
Wow.
Yeah, that was basically
That's a hell of a thing for him to admit.
They were asked about their net cash position. Why do you have such a high net cash position? And one of the reasons was that you need to provide... This is the whole reason Open RAN won't work, by the way, is because people don't want to sign contracts with companies that look like they might be out of business in a few months. When you've got S&P Global and Fitch going, they need to do a restructuring or they risk debt default, no one's going to sign up to do work with you, yeah? Which is why none of those companies have made any progress at all in building market share.
Which is why so much of like creating confidence in you is actually quite a commercial thing to do.
Yeah. So he said every single customer interaction we had in 2017, people were asking, is Ericsson going to survive? And it's not an issue anymore, but it was at the time. And them, I mean, we're getting off into a bit of a tangent,
I'd never had existential worries about Ericsson. I don't know about you.
People were talking about getting taken over by Cisco. You were writing the wrong stories at the time if you were not writing that. Everybody was talking about them going out.
Shots fired.
They were in a worse position. People were talking about Nokia selling mobile.
So this was
They're in a much worse position then than Nokia is now in mobile, I would argue.
So maybe I slightly misunderstood which period you're talking
2016.
about. Right, okay. 2016,
when Hans Vestberg was pretty much fired, it seemed. And
then snapped up by Verizon.
They were in dire straits, Ericsson. They were in a really, really bad situation. People were talking about them getting broken up. There was talk about Cisco taking them over.
And they had that stupid little partnership with Cisco, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. But then there was speculation that might even lead to a full takeover. But coming back to the point about that Pablo is making about them being all in on 5G, they're really good in 5G now, obviously. Like, they're not in that situation anymore. they're the biggest company there is in the world in 5G outside China, and you can't use the Chinese vendors in a lot of places. So the sort of geopolitics has helped them as well. We probably talk about this later, but they've obviously got raced ahead of Nokia in North America with a couple of big wins there, and that's all great. But then in a market where 5G revenues have gone down, I think Omdi's latest sort of expectations, they probably went down about 5 billion last year, and that's after a year when they did go down by 5 billion. It's where's your growth going to come from? And the whole Vonage thing is, and this APIs. One of the problems I have with it is it's very convoluted. It's like equity analysts don't understand this, because I've talked to people not at this year's Ericsson event, but last year when they had a couple of equity analysts there who I can't mention because they were talking off the record, but they were sort of like, nobody gets any of this stuff. It's like, this needs to happen, then that needs to happen, then that needs to happen. Then the operators might spend more money on the stuff that Ericsson actually makes its money from, which is network equipment. But meanwhile, no one's spending any more money. This is the whole idea. The dream is that telcos make more money themselves and then see a reason to spend more money on network equipment.
Yeah, on RAN.
Or on the RAN, basically. That's the rationale for doing the API stuff. They're never going to save themselves doing APIs. There's just not enough money in it. And that guy that they have from McKinsey with the scarf, who looked like a right twat on stage, with his $100 billion.
Was this on Wednesday?
The guy from McKinsey on stage wearing a scarf, defending their utter, and I'm quite happy to say this, by the way, because there's no fucking way that anybody's making $100 billion from this. And by the way, why is it $100 billion now?
Let alone wearing a scarf.
Why is it $100 billion, not $300 billion, which it was in your report last year?
Pulling numbers out your ass.
It's just, it might as well be $1 trillion. Yeah. Why do you just say trillion, McKinsey?
Yeah.
What a load of utter shit. Nobody's making that much money from this. And the problem, this is one area that I kind of poaching a little bit from Dean Bubley here, because he wrote a really good LinkedIn update after the... that doesn't surprise me, because
Pierre just put on a scarf to wind up Ian.
I'm cycling.
French. Is that a French thing, Pierre, wearing scarves?
I'm cycling.
But Dean did a really good LinkedIn write-up, I think, where he was saying that one of the problems, I think, with the way the whole Vonage API story has gone is that when Ericsson started talking about this network API stuff, it was very much about linking you with 5G features, and there's a big 5G quality on demand and other stuff. It's totally turned into a whole CPaaS thing. It all seems to be about communication, basic API, like location and fraud and stuff.
Which is abbreviation for communication platform as a service.
There's no money in any of this. You look at Vonage, it's not just the write-downs. You look at Vonage's revenues last year. They went off a cliff. They're the reason the enterprise business is doing so badly. They're in an awful position, Vonage, at the moment. Absolutely dreadful.
Well, obviously, the write-down was huge.
It's not just the write-down. It's just headline sales performance now is really bad for that company.
I haven't looked into it that closely, but basically Vonage as it was is now, I don't know what proportions. Grab one for Pablo while you're at it.
Do you want one of your Budvars, or do you want to try one of these ones?
Surprise me.
Give him a Hazy Jane. Let's broaden his horizons. Is Vonage is now sort of split between part of the enterprise division that encompasses CPaaS and all that sort of thing, and then this Aduna.
Well, Aduna's the one layer of Vonage.
Yeah.
Which is
But isn't it a separate thing now?
Yes, but what they've basically done is taken a little bit of what Vonage was doing, which is like the sort of network
But that was the speculative bit. That was the stated reason why they bought it, not the CPaaS stuff.
No, that's not how it works. The bit they've taken out is the bit that works. It's like an intermediary platform between the people like Vonage and Infobip and Google would previously have had to sort of do interconnection with all the different operators. They'd have had to do join-ups with all the different telcos. And the idea is this bit they've taken out of Vonage that they've set up as Aduna is like a sort of intermediary platform for you to do that. But most of the money should still... The Aduna's run as a non-profit almost.
It's the aggregator bit.
It's the aggregator bit, but they're not making money from Aduna. They're making money from Vonage. That's the idea.
That feeds into...
But I do have a quick question, if I can, for the two of you. So something that is not clear to me...
get my own beer, shall I, Ian?
Aduna is meant to be, I think, 13 partners overall.
Yeah. There's a new one, KDDI got announced this week.
With Ericsson.
And Infobip.
Ericsson.
But not on the Telecoms.
Ericsson being one of them. equal partner. But it seems to me that from the messaging that I see, that Ericsson seems to be taking a leading role or wants to be perceived as a leading role.
Yeah, they have 50%.
But technically, in terms of like developing the market, though, like the idea is that there is no one that is like more important. Like this should not lead to Ericsson.
Well, it's really tricky, isn't it? My colleague Armita wrote up
that's the question.
An interview with the CEO of Aduna, and one of the questions she asked, which was a great question, was just like, how come Nokia's not involved? And obviously, we know the answer. But it's still a great question to ask.
Because they've got their own initiative.
Yeah, but that feeds into what Pablo was just saying. You know, as long as it's perceived as a Ericsson first thing, that's going to be a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, they've got 50% of it, and they insist that, because Nicholas Hervelder was talking about this when I spoke to him on the same thing, it's like we don't see anybody else doing the same thing, but clearly the big one that's missing from their let's get other people signed up is Nokia, you know, and they I mean, the CEO's position, the CEO who will soon be leaving, is that they're not going to join that, and they're doing their own separate initiatives. So, but then once you get other people thinking we should be the guys doing the aggregation stuff as well, then all of a sudden it starts to look more fragmented. And then you're back in the same problem that you're always in. But the problem, I actually think Aduna is quite a good thing in terms of sorting out the fragmentation issue. Yeah. The problem for me is that APIs anyway is not a lot of money. Like Ondia's forecasts, what are they?
I think it's like 9 billion.
9 billion by 2029 or something, right? You look at that in the context of a telco market where they make $1 trillion altogether in fixed and mobile revenues. So the usage revenues has to be what makes the difference to the business case. This was the idea, is that you get people taking advantage of these APIs and then usage revenues come after that.
But I see two problems with there. Like, I mean, one thing that I disagree with you and one problem. The problem is that you circle back always on the fact that telcos are not able to sell different things than, you know, consumer SIM cards.
Yeah.
And it becomes much more difficult. So you can have everything that you want, but if you're not good at selling that solution, if you don't have the expertise in your sales force, blah, 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 it doesn't matter, right? You're not going to get that money. But the thing that I slightly disagree with, I like the initiative. I think it's very good to see everyone joining hands and trying to do something together.
Yeah.
But then every single of those telcos is also doing things on the side.
Yes, they are, yeah.
And that is, to me, is like, okay, do you really want that to succeed if you're doing things on the side and potentially you're going to do them faster and trying to kind of screw over the other telcos?
Orange has even just set up a new APIs division for doing stuff that's...
that for me is like, okay, this is like becomes almost like a formality rather than you're really, you know, trying to get that to win, to succeed.
Yeah, and that's something actually Ericsson's wrestled with for a while as it tries to develop these other channels to market. When's it going to start treading on the toes of its primary customers, who also are trying to develop some of those channels to market? So this is a delicate thing. I mean, it's a complete tangent. I'll talk about it briefly, but there was a thing I was just reading about this morning and thought about covering, where there's a scoop from the FT, although I think Reuters has covered it as well, that ARM is thinking of designing and manufacturing its own chips. And for people who don't know about the ARM business model, the whole point of the ARM business model is that they just sell designs, or they license designs to people like NVIDIA or Qualcomm or whoever, who then go and turn them into chips.
Yeah.
As soon as ARM starts making its own chips, then it's competing directly with its primary customer base. And I only mention that as another example of how, when you try and diversify, you're going to end up treading on the toes of your primary customers.
FT today?
Yeah.
I hope they didn't position that as a scoop, because that's definitely not a scoop. I
think they did.
Well, ARM's been there's been speculation that ARM's going to buy a company called Ampere for a long time.
Right. Maybe this was like the scoop was some insider information that they're definitely going ahead with it or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's been loads of reporting about ARM acquiring a company called Ampere that's owned by Oracle at the moment, or it's heavily funded by Oracle, who do ARM-based processors, and they're actually active in the RAN stuff. They're one of the companies that could be a vRAN successor to Intel, you know.
Okay. Anyway, I only mentioned that in the context of Ericsson, and I am going to start in the name of what passes for discipline on this podcast to try and wrap up those sort of two combined segments that we've done. with my final thoughts, and I'll invite your two final thoughts as well. But yes, this is one of the many challenges someone like Ericsson has. They want to diversify. They want to get more involved in enterprise wireless, but then at the same time, they might have lots of operator customers who also have got their own enterprise wireless offerings. And how do they sort of balance those interests? But I'm going to give my wrap up and then invite you to. I think if I could summarize the vibe I got from Ericsson yesterday, and is they're trying to say, yes, Ian, I mean, they didn't explicitly bring you up. I sometimes bring you up just to annoy them. But yeah, it's not that they're out of the blue going, and that fucking Ian, what's he going on about? People like Ian might just sort of say, all right, show me the money, and then you'll talk about these equity analysts, and we talk about all these projections, and you'll slander people from McKinsey and all that sort of thing, and their scarves.
Oh, well, I don't think anything was slander that I said.
No, I'm not inviting them to sue you.
I said he looked like a twat with his scarf. That's not slander.
Well, actually, no, it's just opinion, isn't it?
Exactly.
Opinion's valid.
And his forecasts are crap.
Which again is an opinion. Anyway, and all those are valid. And I actually think Ericsson, and this is where I'm slightly conflicted about how I feel about it. Ericsson's basically saying a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah.
They're saying, look, this shit is going to happen sooner or later. We don't know when, but we're going to start to have ubiquitous connectivity within constrained environments in the sort of enterprise connectivity way, where we've got drones buzzing around, not crashing into each other and all that sort of thing. And whatever sort of utopian thing you're going to go about. In fact, I just remembered I was going to read a little bit of my my writing because you reminded me of it. So it's going to happen, and other things are going to happen, and this network exposure thing's going to happen. I think a quote I got from Frederick Yedling was like, giving developers access to 8 billion subscribers. I don't know if they're strictly subscribers or subscriptions, and there is a difference, but I won't dwell on that. And that's quite evocative, isn't it? If you could be one developer accessing 8 billion people.
Yeah.
Let's and so there's all that. Let me quickly finish. So that's all that, and they're basically saying, and they didn't explicitly say this, is my interpretation. They're saying the rising tide lifts all ships, and we're not sure yet how big a piece of that rising tide we're going to get, and our operator partners are going to get, but everyone will benefit to some extent, and then there's a little bit of a bun fight within that as to who gets a piece of that rising tide. Now, there's two assumptions based into that are worthy of scrutiny, and then I'll ask you, Ian, and then we'll finish asking Pablo about this. One is whether that tide's going to rise at all, because that's speculative. This network exposure thing might not pay off. Private 5G might not ever grow massively, whatever. And then the second one is, of course, how big a piece of the action Ericsson and then its direct commercial partners are going to get. But that is my summary of what I think their broader strategic view is we're investing in how the world is going to be technologically, specifically as wireless connectivity affects the future world. And in fact, I will, before I hand it over, I will read a little bit of what I wrote, because it's sort of relevant. I said, this is me reading myself, which I do sometimes, Pablo. It's a bit narcissistic, isn't it?
Just a little bit. Just missing a picture of yourself as well.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Just looking like a winner. I said, who knows where technology is going to take us in even the next few years? The hype around AI is now so intense that most science fiction seems mundane and unimaginative in comparison. The message Ericsson wants to convey is that it's doing everything it can to put the pieces in place to ensure it's the default wireless technology provider for whatever the future holds. And then I've just got one other bit of a paragraph because it concerns Vestberg. I said, this inevitably requires it to be somewhat speculative, but in a focused and disciplined way. Long gone is the diversification spam of the Vestberg era, and all of Ericsson's many bets are now focused solely on what wireless might be used for next. And that's really my point, that they're saying there are going to be future uses for wireless that perhaps we can't even imagine yet. and we're just going to try and make sure. And I invoke the fairly sort of hackneyed Wayne Gretzky skate to where the puck's going to be thing at the end of my piece. They're betting that whatever it is, and they're not quite sure what it is, they're going to be the people who are providing it. So, what do you think of that, Ian?
The problem I have with the McKinsey thing that you guys were like laughing at me, and is that
he's laughing because you were so strident about
because
it.
It's so.
I love how you're going back to McKinsey. Out of everything that you said, it's like McKinsey.
I don't know why I bother.
It's so easily attackable that the money that the forecast that he came up
because
with,
he's pulling numbers out of his ass.
And even I don't even think Ericsson would agree with this. These sorts of numbers, like they'll put him on stage and be quite happy for him to be saying
with
it.
His scarf.
But he was specifically mentioning about how much value banks and those sorts of organisations attach to these, to being able to sort of insert these APIs into an app that somebody might use that could prevent things like fraud, right? Well, that's Omdia's forecast of 9 billion. That's what that is. Anything else on top of that has to come from extra usage revenues, right? So you have to have someone then on the user, like someone like us, or someone in an enterprise market saying, we need to move away from this all-you-can-eat model for a start. This is actually one thing Nicholas Herveldop said to me. I said, if those loftier revenue forecasts are going to be realised, don't we need to completely change the
some kind
model?
of metering
he was
going
like,
on.
yes, we do.
Yeah.
That's a massive bet. You're expecting somebody, because APIs are readily available, that all of a sudden will say, we're prepared to pay a bit more for some low latency or a bit more for some extra bandwidth each month. I mean, that's a model that has been talked about for a long time. That's never gone anywhere. ARPUs have gone down since I was working in mobile in 1999. When people used to spend a lot of money just to get a voice service, they've carried on going down.
Yeah.
I do not see a likelihood in the main consumer market, which is where most of the money is, that people will go, we're going to spend more because there's a higher quality service. I just think it's a real big punt. And those sorts of figures like 100 billion are pretty much, that's what would have to change. It's nothing to do with APIs, which is 9 billion. Yeah. I would trust Omdia's forecast over McKinsey's on that. That's the first thing. You're just saying that
because Pablo's in here.
No, I'm not. It's not even just Omdia, anybody else.
Yeah, very good. It's not my forecast, by the way. So,
and then the other thing I'd say is that my main takeaway is it's just so slow.
Yeah.
Everything in this industry is, when did Vonage when did they sort of make the offer for Vonage? They bought it in 2022. It was probably 2021. We're now in 2025.
And they've written most of it down.
Nobody was talking about generative AI back when that all got talked about. Nobody knew who Sam Altman was. Nobody was talking about any of these companies. This industry is getting left behind by things that are a much bigger deal. If they really wanted to sort of look at a growth opportunity, and a lot of people are really skeptical about this whole AI RAN thing, but I think that's a better bet for the kind of people like Ericsson and Nokia than any of this stuff to do with APIs. I really do.
Not to contradict you, but is it fair to say that Ericsson is betting that other people's bet will fail, and they're going to be conservative doing what they're doing now because they bet on other people to fail?
Well, they might do, but if other people fail, then they're pretty much the only RAN company in the world.
Yeah, well, that's what they're betting on. They're betting that...
Which is a neat segue.
Yeah, which is a segue, which we'll lead up to. Yeah, that is a very good segue.
Smooth.
Smooth. Well, that's why we get the big bucks, Pablo.
You get the big bucks?
No, we don't.
Once again,
that was very much a joke.
I got the wrong job.
That was very much a joke.
Wrong job.
Maybe we'll go to a pub after and compare salaries. They're betting that they're the wireless guys, and that whatever happens with wireless, they'll be the primary beneficiary of.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pablo, you were talking. Do you have any last thoughts before I move it on the Ericsson thing? Any sort of roundup?
No, I think we covered it pretty thoroughly, and quite good, the beer.
Yeah,
you like the pale ale.
Your thoughts on
this is nice actually.
You're drinking Budweiser Budvar, which I'm a really big fan of, not least because it's the original Budweiser, not that American paste.
Oh, that's not beer.
No. I mean, even Americans, and I've spoken to some, and I won't name them just because it wasn't a public conversation, agree that a lot of...
You're naming everything that has been said, except for the conversation around the beer.
They're not going to be worried about their opinions about beer.
No, I actually really try and be careful about that, because you'll chat to people and you're just nattering away. And then suddenly you blurt it out in a public domain. And if I was them, I'd be like, "Oh, fucking hell, Scott! I thought we were just having a chat."
Okay, fair enough.
That's what it is. And it's nothing highly. It's not the most important topic. But I have spoken to other Americans who agree that a lot of American beer is piss. Of which Budweiser is a good example. And then Budvar is a Czech beer, and it's a really full taste. Yeah. It's a really sort of classic hoppy sort of Czech beer. You know, I love a bit of Staropramen or Staropramen.
Pioneered by Germans.
Pioneered by Germans. Arguably perfected by Czechs.
Yeah.
Although Germans have got this purity law where you can only have about 4 ingredients.
When it was full of Germans.
Only 4, yeah. You cannot add anything else to the beer.
Sorry, what were you just saying?
It was perfected by Czechs when that area of the world was full of Germans.
There we are. See?
Wow.
Well done for finding a positive in an otherwise negative thing.
It was perfected by Czechs when it was when the Czech Republic was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Right.
And the main brewers were German speakers.
Okay, so you weren't talking about and shit.
I thought about the other.
But it does link to that sort of stuff, obviously.
Right. It's like the first thing they did when they invaded was bring over some distilling.
It was very much a Germanic thing, the whole kind of Pilsner.
Okay, let's not go there. If we're going to go down this rabbit hole,
even though the Slavs would like to think that they're the kind of pioneers of Pilsner, they're not.
No, I'll completely defer to the Germans on that. And they've got quite these top-down like purity laws in Germany about how you make the beer as well, which I respect. So what do you think, Pablo? So you're drinking a bit of Hazy Jane, which is like an American sort of pale ale type of thing. Have you drunk much of that sort of thing before? Have you normally been a Pilsner guy?
I've been practicing quite a bit.
This is nothing new.
Diversifying into the.
There we are, diversifying like Ericsson, except with beer. That's what you should do, Ericsson. Get into beer.
Not diversifying very much, are they?
All right.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said that. I'm trying to draw a line under that fucking thing. Nokia.
Who are diversifying?
Yeah.
Who are diversifying quite a lot. So my headline. So Nokia at the start of the week announced a new CEO, which on one level was a surprise, on another level it wasn't, which I'll get into why in a bit.
I think it was a complete surprise.
Okay, cool. And then the new CEO is this American bloke who most recently has been at Intel covering their sort of AI and data center bit,
which is the second biggest group, I think.
Right. Yeah. But he's only there for a year, and prior to that, he spent a lot of time at HPE, who we've spoken about a fair bit. Presumably,
he's very short-lived at Intel,
playing golf or something,
which makes you wonder.
It does make you wonder that he went there for a year and just thought, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Intel's not having the best time of it at the moment, is it?
No, it's like people who've been a long time at companies, and then they go to another company. Pretty much Hans Vestberg, maybe going from Ericsson to Verizon. You always thought, oh well, that's going to be a good thing for Ericsson in terms of its dealings with Verizon.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's necessarily a read-through for Nokia and Intel in this. It's more probably his background in data centers and AI.
Exactly, and that's the core angle on this is I thought it was, I don't know if in your job role, Pablo, you like listen to press conferences and that sort of thing very much, but we obviously listen to a lot. And you normally expect them to say the most generic boilerpoint sort of.
I thought he was unusually bland.
He was, but what I thought wasn't unusually bland. No, he completely played forward defensive stroke. I remember I had to explain what a forward defensive stroke is to a Swedish guy on Wednesday.
But actually. I thought Lundmark, when he joined, then they're always a bit like this. Like you say, they come in and they don't really say very much.
Understandably so.
He sort of said he was a rookie, didn't he?
Of course, they don't want to fuck things up on day one.
I thought this guy was. Bland's maybe a bit cruel, but he was overly safe.
Yeah, he was cautious. Yeah. He was cautious. But I'm fairly sympathetic towards being cautious when you've just started.
If you're being bullish, then you need to deliver straight away.
You do. That's true.
That's another angle, isn't it? Yeah. But I always think, my default setting is how I'm on this pod. I'm quite unfiltered. But even when I start a job, I'm on my best behaviour and all that sort of thing. You just want to get bedded in before you start getting too gobby. Anyway. But what I thought was not so filtered was the sort of stated reason behind not Lundmark leaving, and we can get into that a little bit, but it just seems like he's just got bored of being a CEO, as far as I can tell.
He'd done 92 earnings calls.
That's right. He mentioned it, didn't he? He went, oh, fuck 93.
And it sounded like he didn't want to do a 93rd.
Well, actually, he is, because he's going to hang around till April. But there we are.
He went beyond it. He's an advisor, though, I think.
No, I think he's still CEO till April.
Justin Hotard's CEO from 1st of April.
Yeah. Okay, so we're basically agreeing with each other.
But the next earnings update's after April.
All right, fair enough. I stand corrected. Just whatever.
Yeah.
If I can just fucking move things on a little bit. But then, you know, some of the stuff that I extracted from it, and then they had the chairwoman of the board, her surname's Baldolf, if I'm pronouncing that right. What's her first name? I can't find it.
Sari, I think, or Sami, is it?
Yes, Sari, S-A-R-I. And basically, the vibe I got from it, I mean, I've got some direct quotes, but I'll paraphrase. The vibe I got from it is they're going, yeah, we got him in because we think all the cool shit is going on in connecting data centers in the States. And so my headline was...
I don't think just in the States.
Okay, well, just let me...
Yeah.
He interrupts so much, doesn't he?
Well, it's a podcast.
That's enough beer for you.
Interrupt you. Otherwise, you just go on ad nauseam.
Not at all. I'm very disciplined. My headline was Nokia signals move away from mobile and Europe with a new CEO. And I will justify my US thing, and then I'll hand over to you, Ian. Like you weren't going to just take the initiative anyway. Where is it? And, you know, I will admit to a bit of cherry picking. This is another thing us journalists do, Pablo. You know, we'll sometimes cherry pick something to suit our narrative, and I'll plead guilty as any other journalist to that.
As long as it's interesting, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, and I think the narrative is still coherent and valid. I said, ask why they went for an internal candidate. Badolf said, quote, US is an important market for us, close quote.
Yeah, she said more than that, though. You've shortened that quote.
Well, that's... I know.
The main thing she said was that he's got experience in AI and data centers, and the US.
But she still said US is an important market.
Sure, but then he himself referred to that Macron thing that they've announced this week, where they said they're going to spend 200 billion on AI. Everybody's getting into AI. Yeah, we were at a press conference recently with Nokia.
Yeah, just in case.
Yeah. We were at a press conference recently with Nokia on this very, very topic to do with a UK company called Nscale.
Yeah,
everybody's all over this, so I don't. You know, and obviously why wouldn't you want to be in the US? It's a fucking big market and an important market. So you're obviously going to want, you know, and they probably are spending more with things like Stargate and all these crazy things on this stuff. So I think they're clearly going to want to have sort of people who've got relationships in that market. But I didn't see it as necessarily a sign that they want to take focus off Europe. They'll be wanting to sell this
they've
AI.
Employed an American, and they've said in the press conference that America's really important to us. I don't think it's unreasonable to read between the lines a little bit there.
I don't think it's a sign they want to take focus off Europe. They'll be wanting to sell. They'll be listening to that Macron announcement, and they'll be thinking, what can we get out of that as well? What can we get further with Nscale? What you know, there's a lot
Obviously
of investments that have actually already been made in America that they'll be looking for any opportunities.
I think you guys are both right, but the way that I see it is that in a moment when Ericsson has been sort of more and more associated with the US because of contracts and other things, maybe Nokia wants to make a statement that we are still very much
totally
big on the US because, you know, US for everyone type of thing.
But if they'd hired I mean, their tendency is to maybe, I mean, they had all this experience with Stephen Elop in Canada, but if they'd hired another Nordic CEO, you wouldn't say, well, they're taking their focus off America now. It's very easy just because of someone's nationality to say, oh,
but it's because there's a change that it marks some kind of inflection. I mean, look, I'll completely concede to headline chasing a bit and being a bit hyperbolic and perhaps oversimplifying, but I don't think it's unreasonable to read the tea leaves a little bit on that.
I don't think they're pulling out of Europe.
Of course they're not pulling out of Europe, and I'm not saying that.
They will go after any AI and data center business they can get in Europe as much as in the US.
Totally, I concede that.
Obviously, the US is an important market. It's probably a more profitable market on the sort of a lot of the stuff that they've done in mobile than European markets. But yeah, I didn't see it necessarily as we don't see Europe as an important market anymore. We need to, this whole sense that Ericsson and Nokia want to kind of up sticks and move to the US and leave Europe behind. is a little bit overstated.
Also, another thing,
you think?
Well,
go ahead,
if that's serious, it's incredibly worrying for Europe. I mean, because you're talking about losing, and it also points to a lot of the bullshit to do with Open RAN, frankly, because one of the things that Open RAN was always supposed to be about was actually seeding local suppliers, local alternatives to big kit vendors. If you then go and lose,
it didn't work.
Right, it's definitely not going to work if you lose your only two big technology companies. And there's speculation. I'm probably going to lead to talking about this anyway, but there's speculation in the FT. We wrote about this week about the idea of Trump resurrecting this idea to buy Ericsson and Nokia. So then Europe, the only
same time as he's buying Greenland and
technology
Mexico
successes that it has
maybe there's a bundle deal or something.
Do you know what I mean?
Relocate to America. So the two of the only really important companies it's got then relocate to America. That's an absolute disaster.
Oh, it would be a disaster for Europe, but at the same time, I think there is like the assumption for you that Europe is in any way a strong strategic center.
I'm not saying Europe's a strong strategic centre, but I don't think you would, as Nokia's new CEO, think this isn't a market that we should serve. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, no. You're definitely going to serve everything where you can. I 100% agree on that.
And I also think the European, there's a lot of barriers to a kind of Trump-type attempt to engineer some kind of takeover of Ericsson and Nokia. If the EU, if the governments of Sweden and Finland aren't concerned about losing like national assets like that, then they should be, and I'm pretty sure they would be.
But I personally don't think they would have the bandwidth to oppose something like that. You can play the NATO card, or you can play whatever card the US wants. So if the US wants to pull the trigger on that, Europe is just okay. Thank you.
I'm not convinced about that.
You think that's Sweden or Finland, and we're going like way beyond.
That's fine. This is the part of the pod where tangents are particularly
assets where the intervention would happen to prevent something like that from going ahead, and that's the sort of thing I can sense happening with a deal attempt like that.
You would really want to inimitate the largest, most powerful and angriest country in the world.
Assertive. Yeah.
Well, I don't think they'd... the reason for them blocking it is not to... If everybody thinks that we should just go along and do what Trump wants to do because it's the largest, most powerful and definitely the angriest country in the world.
That's really different. I'm not saying we should do it, but I can see the rationale for countries to do it from a political pressure, from a security risk, whatever, environment point of view.
Yeah. Well, we might as well all give up then, mightn't we?
Oh, we shouldn't, but I don't see European countries really. The whole idea of a united Europe.
Down and go, Trump, do what you want to do, buy whatever you want, take whatever you want. Then,
well, I think again, I don't agree with that. But I don't see Europe being strong, united together. And you can see issues like with Ukraine and stuff like that.
By the way, I think aside from all that side of it, like looking at it in a more business perspective, I think the idea of Trump necessarily wanting to negotiate a takeover of Ericsson and Nokia is a lot of telecom analysts getting very excited.
Yeah. Well,
this is not a great... What Trump and his
not
team
a priority, definitely.
What Trump and his team are bothered about, if they are bothered about tech at the moment, is not what they were bothered about back when he had his first administration, when they were all obsessed with 5G as something that was going to be super
Trump once went on about 7G in his first...
Yeah, he was obsessed with the Gs. 7G, 6G. They couldn't give a shit about that stuff anymore, I don't think. The thing they're bothered about at the moment is things like DeepSeek and AI and all this kind of stuff.
But what I think more broadly, and, obviously this is a tangent, and Ian and I and Pierre were always arguing the toss about to what extent we can talk about things that are adjacent to telecoms but not core telecoms. And of course, talking just general geopolitics, which is one of the Richard Fogg sort of...
No, but this is relevant to telecoms. We're talking about it in the context of Ericsson and Nokia.
Well, exactly, I'm just framing it. But why we're talking about Trump's attitude and EU policy and that sort of thing is because it ultimately does affect all of us. And the interesting thing, and this is where sort of reading between lines of what I think you were saying, Pablo, and correct me if I've misinterpreted it, is so many things have changed since Trump won that election. And the way in which he's presenting itself. And a lot of it is laughable, like the fucking renaming the Gulf of Mexico and all that. It's just like, well, stop being a twat.
I don't think much of it's laughable.
Well, I think that is.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, but maybe reading between the lines of what you're saying, it's not laughable because the implications are serious. And he's got everyone on the balls of their feet. He's got everyone shitting themselves a little bit, partly because you just don't know what he's going to come up with next. And I think I agree with both of you. It's very unlikely he'd buy either or both of Nokia or Ericsson. But part of his MO is if there's even 5% chance, you're like, oh shit. And that sort of affects your behaviour. And what he is into more broadly, regardless of the tech involved, is sovereignty. He's, make America great again, America first, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And you never know what he's going to do. Like another laughable thing he's done, Ian, and perhaps even you will concede this, is he started renaming public buildings in America, giving them more fucking patriotic names. I think that's superficial. But the only reason I mention it is that feeds into what his gig seems to be, which is just incredible nationalism and incredible protectionism as well.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk about Trump
superficial either.
And what?
I don't think that's superficial renaming,
Oh, you don't?
No, it's like you are creating like a certain
a
culture
vibe.
And a vibe and a following, and you're strengthening certain ideals.
Getting away from the Trump bullshit that's not really to do with telecom, that on the Nokia thing, I think where I would agree with you, and I don't think this is new, is there's definitely they're doubling down on AI and fixed.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm pretty sure we've both written stories about where they say their growth opportunity in the last year before this change happened.
So you're talking about Nokia specifically here?
This CEO appointment didn't signify that Nokia's focus now was on AI and data centers. Nokia's focus.
Well, I think it did.
So I don't, because I wrote the story about 3 months ago. So it didn't. Nokia, I wrote a story.
Fucking pulling rank on me now.
I'm not pulling rank on you. I'm just saying this didn't signify. I wrote a story several months ago.
He'll have
Nokia has a growth story all of a sudden, and it's to do with AI. I think that's pretty much my headline.
I think you need.
Okay, but I think this.
The signification of them. Yes, it might cement it, but the signification of it came when Pekka Lundmark said, "Oh, big growth opportunities now in data center and AI. It's not in 5G anymore." That's the signification of the thing. This wasn't a new thing that they've just come up with. It was already established for months. Anybody who's just noticed it was obviously sleeping on the.
Maybe a question for you: as 6G will eventually come, do you think their priority will remain on data center and AI, or will shift back to 6G?
I think that's a really good question, because one of the assumptions is that because they're focusing more on data centers and AI, are they then going to deprioritize mobile, where they've clearly had some big setbacks in the last couple of
they
years.
can't. I mean, it's making too much money anyways. Even if
it's the biggest unit.
Yeah.
I think it's strategically important, and this gets to the whole do we really want to lose a European company that is one of the only two RAN vendors in the world that's outside China? I personally think that would be something that would be a geopolitical concern, and I don't think it's something, by the way, that would be welcomed by any of Europe's telcos. I've spoken to people in Europe's telcos at a senior level off the record who've said that they wouldn't, they'd be worried about the lack of, a reduction in choice in Europe will be a massive concern. One of the things about Open RAN was actually getting more supplies into the market. If you then go the other way by losing one of the big ones, that's like a regressive step, basically. So I think that's a concern anyway. I don't think Nokia's in this. I think the situation they're in mobile gets overplayed, that they're in this crap situation. I think they were in a much worse position back in 2019, 2020, when they had all sorts of technical problems.
Yeah, and all that.
And that was during the sort of first Trump
administration. Which coincided with Intel beautifully.
Yeah, well, I mean, so here's an interesting thing. They're less dependent on Intel now than Ericsson is. I mean, that's an interesting story.
Except for their execs. They're quite dependent on Intel for execs.
Technologically, they're less dependent on Intel than Ericsson is, and that's a story that is kind of one of the things that was kind of a bit of a discussion point at the Ericsson do, sort of on background and at the bar, is Ericsson's relationship with Intel, which is very, very close on the chip side, and Nokia's definitely sort of moved away from that to some extent. They've sorted out a lot of the software problems they had on the RAN side. Their RAN strategy is, they're not in the position they were in 2019, 2020. I don't see that the AT&T decision, and I know some people have said this was to do with, it was like a reflection of them not being quite as good as Ericsson. They probably aren't quite as good as Ericsson, but I don't think that's the reason they made that decision. I think it was about, in fact, they even said this in the week, it was about having a single SMO layer, because then they thought you can build on top of that. But if you're going to go to one SMO layer, who are you going to choose? Not only are they regarded as a 5G leader, but they're also 2/3 of the network. So the way they wanted to do things, just Nokia was always going to lose out there. There was nothing really they could do there. Unfortunately, it's come after this Verizon loss, and they now have almost nothing in North America. But that business unit's still profitable.
Yeah.
And they're, as I say, technologically, I think they're better than they were. If the US did take it over, by the way, I don't see what the US would do with it. There's nobody that you can combine it with in the US to sort of realise synergies and fat.
But that's the irrational. That's why the Trump tangent was relevant, because he's such a free radical. He will do things for very irrational purposes. What you're arguing is on the basis of rationality, which is obviously the correct argument to make.
Well,
but he might just do it because he fucking fancies
I don't want to mention
I can give
Trump.
you a little bit of a weird rational angle. You take Nokia, you make it bigger than Huawei.
Yeah, but no.
Yeah, well, that would be the way.
I mean, it's not really rational, but it's
make
like
it bigger than Huawei. This is, I mean, forget Trump.
No,
I don't want to mention Trump. The idea of someone buying, fuck off, fucking mentioning Trump. Like someone else buying Nokia, let's say, whoever it might be. What would they do differently with Nokia that isn't working now in a market that's like, the revenues have gone down 5 billion last year. They went down 5 billion the year before. You could spend more on R&D, but why would you be spending more on R&D when people like Deloro and Omdia are saying it's going to be a flat market for 5 years? Why would that be an area that you feel that you should invest in and make more money? We've just been talking about
because
this
it's viewed as strategic.
It's not viewed as strategic as it was back when Trump was there first time round. If you want to,
you just mentioned Trump
again. Because you brought up the strategic.
I didn't say Trump. You fucking brought it up.
Things because they're strategic. They buy them for a business reason. What's a growth market?
No, I agree with that. But I would say you increase R&D so you can maintain market share, even in a flat market. So you still need to do that anyway.
But the market shares of those companies are unchanged for years. Ever since we started talking about this, they could pump a lot more money into R&D. Nokia, you could say, if that's what you want to do. Ericsson's increased its R&D massively, by the way.
So you think that increasing R&D is not really going to move the needle significantly?
In terms of market share?
Yeah. And therefore in terms of revenues as well.
Ericsson now spends about almost twice as much as what it was doing in R&D as it was under Hans Vestberg.
Okay.
They lost market share, according to you guys, last year, Ericsson.
I blame my colleagues in the infrastructure team. I'm not responsible
pretty
for
much
that.
those, and I mean, if you take
because then I'm sorry, but then it's a terrible business. You increase your R&D and you don't get anything out of it.
I mean, you can get those big swaps that happen, like the AT&T one, where they've taken Nokia out, or they are taking Nokia out.
So imagine at the end of the day when they say, okay, we increase our R&D, what did we got back? And from what you're saying is that you don't get anything back.
There's only.
And they need to prove sort of that
if the whole market's only going to deliver you 30, I mean, the whole size of the market's like 35 billion in revenues, yeah? So you're going to spend a certain amount of R&D based on a certain expectation of a return. Yeah. But the expectation of the overall market is it's not going to grow. So how much you spend on R&D, nobody's going to go and spend 50 billion on R&D in a market that's only making 35 billion, yeah?
No, I mean,
you're not going to have 100% of the market anyway.
Excessive.
And it's a market where we know, I mean, you know this, changes don't happen easily. You tie yourself into a company for 10 years. You build your equipment out. You depreciate it over 10 years. You're very resistant to doing a swap as an operator. That's why Open RAN's not happen more quickly.
So it's like, the technology side of it, which is like sort of what a lot of us analysts are working, is like, secondary relevance. Because
I don't
if that's secondary, what's primary?
Well, the business connection that you're making between the vendor and the telco.
Right.
I mean, they clearly.
I would be investing there rather than technology.
Clearly, if you've really screwed up on your tech, and
that's a big difference,
Nokia did
right?
5 years ago.
And I agree, Nokia did this 5 years ago. But this is what I'm saying. I don't think they're in that situation now.
As long as you're sort of okayish, things will continue as they are. And of course, if you screw big time...
you've got to probably be better than okay-ish. But those companies...
Well, how many competitors you have, though?
3. There's
exactly.
Only 3 spending
That's
money.
what I'm saying, that okay is
maybe
like
Samsung. It's not any different from any other market where you need to spend huge amounts of R&D to have the ability to produce something at very high value and sort of very advanced tech. Chips is another one. You're never going to get a market of 10, 12 players in, doing the sort of stuff that TSMC
I'm just curious because I would expect that, if you increase R&D significantly, I would expect that you can get like returns multiplied by X type of thing, or benefits multiplied by X. But you're saying that in this market, at least, that's not really the case, that there's no point.
Well, you'd have to look at, you could look at, Ericsson's a good example of that, because they have increased R&D by a lot.
Yeah, absolutely fine. It's just interesting and a little bit sad for them. But
can I, sorry, Ian, I know this could keep going for a little while, but we're nearly out of time. I think it's really good. This is another example, by the way, of why I like podcasts, because the thing that you two are throwing backwards and forwards at each other is fascinating, because you're trying to find an equilibrium. You obviously are coming at it from different directions, but you're trying to reconcile your differing viewpoints, and that can only happen over the course of time, of which we have little left. So I'm going to wrap it up and bring it back to the Nokia announcement. So Ian and I obviously disagree about how much I read into it with what it says about their strategy regarding both fixed versus mobile and their geographical strategy, and that's fine.
No, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that I think they'd already sort of thought.
Yeah, I was just summarising. I wasn't trying to misrepresent you. I was just summarising the conversation we'd had on the pod. But that was obviously one of my takeaways. And again, as I just explained earlier to you, Pablo, sometimes us journalists, it won't necessarily be the most comprehensive, well-informed takeaway, but you've got a few hours to pick an angle and just chuck it out the door.
And just stick with it, or change your mind.
Well, stick with it or not. I mean, that's where this podcast's fun, because then it gets interrogated, and I hope I'm not too dogmatic, and I certainly don't think I know everything. But let me just wrap it up. So that was my point of view. Why don't we, in the last 5 minutes, go to Ian, then Pablo, just last thoughts on when you heard about this new CEO and what you took from it. You first, Ian.
I mean, I don't disagree with you that it signals that they're really interested in data centers and AI.
But you were just saying they have been for a while.
It's a particularly new thing. The main thing that surprised me was Pekka Lundmark sort of stepping in, because he'd already said that, he pretty much said that was his main area of interest.
Oh shit, I've got one more thing to say. But
and I think he'd announced that he'd bought Infinera, which is about to close.
Yeah, which is a big deal.
He said we're going to spend another 100 million a year on research and development and sales and marketing channels in IP networking. We went to a press conference where they were showing off Nscale as one of their customers. They were talking about Microsoft.
And that Nscale thing was so instructive to me.
Yeah, I thought all of that was already on the cards. But I thought Pekka Lundmark might be the guy who carried on pushing it.
Right.
I was a little bit surprised because, like, Nokia's share price, by the way, is up 40% in the last year. This is the other thing.
So again, right. So is Ericsson's, I think, more or less.
I think this perception, at one point I wanted to make this perception that Nokia is somehow in trouble and they need to get rid of mobile. Diversification allows you, the nice thing about diversification, they're much more diversified than Ericsson, is that when one bit isn't doing so well, perhaps, you can rely on the other bits.
Yeah,
Ericsson
100%.
only has 5G to rely on at the moment, whereas Nokia, even though it's had these mobile struggles, and I totally agree that they've lost some market share clearly in North America.
I imagine that most sort of investors would, then qualify Nokia to be more sustainable longer term than Ericsson.
I mean,
not knowing anything about that, by the way.
I think their group level stuff looks better than Ericsson's does at the moment, but the mobile bit doesn't look as good as Ericsson. So,
but it's one of different,
But it's more diversified. So I would be more optimistic about them. I was just a little bit surprised at Lundmark stepping aside, but to me it didn't sound like. I know there was speculation in the FT. I think got it first.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to bring up before I hand over to Pablo.
He was being replaced. And I didn't feel that he was necessarily being. I didn't take away he was being forced out.
No,
I really didn't.
I didn't take that from it either. No,
I think he was like, I've done 92 earnings calls.
Yeah, he's just like, fuck this. I can't be bothered anymore.
So,
can I just say quickly, Pablo, before I ask you for your last thoughts on it? In my piece, I said you have to. Oh yeah, there was. There's a quote from the chair of the board. Sorry, Baldolf.
Doesn't sound very Finnish, that name, but she did sound Finnish on the call.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just you can tell by my failure to pronounce it that it's just not English. she said, planning for this leadership transition was initiated last spring.
Yeah.
And that was
I think that's when he said, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And then she went on to say, and that was when Pekka told the board that he would like to consider moving on from executive roles to a different kind of capacity, which actually begs another question. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him on the Nokia board by the end of the year. But that's another bit of speculation.
I mean, to that point, though, that you've just made, like when he said that, then they weren't in as good a position, I don't think, this time last year. Maybe there was pressure on him to go.
Fine, but he's stuck with it. He hasn't, he probably had an opportunity to go, actually, no, I will hang around. But I just thought it was really interesting. This is more a journalist, like, inside baseball thing. So the FT wrote the story, which Ian's already referred to. So this was dated September the 12th. Yasmin and Richard from the FT. And the headline was, Nokia seeks to replace CEO in bid to revive falling sales. And it's a good scoop. But the thing that really caught my eye about it is they did the proper journalistic thing, which is they went to Nokia and went, so here's our scoop. What have you got to say? And Nokia went, nah, he's definitely not going. And they actually knew for 6 months that he was going. And I just said in my piece, which I've seen other people refer to on LinkedIn, I just said in my piece, I don't know how you feel about this, Ian, as a fellow journalist.
Didn't they say something about we're not getting rid of him imminently, but there's always succession planning in place? I thought they said something about there's always succession planning in place.
That was the second bit. Was the second bit. But the first bit, here we are. I've got the FT piece up in front of me. So the second bit is what you were saying. It's our responsibility to always keep an eye on things, to paraphrase them. But the first bit of the statement from the FT piece is, the board fully supports President and CEO Pekka Lundmark and is not undergoing a process to replace him. I mean, that's fucking bullshit, isn't it?
Maybe they already made the decision, so, technically they didn't lie.
I know, it is a lie, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it is a lie.
It's a white lie.
And that's what, I'm not holding it against them. But if I was the FT, I'd be a bit butthurt. And the only thing I said in my piece is like, when they say things, when they say lies like that, and I think part of the job of a journalist is to call out these lies, because companies and politicians lie all the time. Yeah. I'm not so naive as to be all shocked, but I still think it's worth calling it out. And that was obviously a lie. Anyway, that was just that little tangent. Yeah. Pablo, let's finish off on you. When you saw this Nokia news, what did you take away from it?
I'm in a very selfish way, I'm worried how much more do I need to work on AI compared to my usual area of research.
Right.
Because it seems that everyone is just fucking...
Is there an AI person? Is there an AI specialist at Omdia?
Oh yeah, we have plenty of AI. Okay. And
I'm
not one of them.
But you're thinking how it'll overlap with your thing.
It's like if whatever market you're covering, they want some AI coverage in it.
Yes. Well, it's such a buzzword now.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking, how much do I need to then push into AI, if it's not already covered by somewhere else, to remain relevant? I know it's very selfish, but...
No, but totally.
That's the first thing that came to mind.
And I think it's reasonable for you to worry about it as a distraction because, you're expert in your area and your area hasn't suddenly gone away just because everyone's going on about fucking ChatGPT and DeepSeek and that sort of thing. And if your clients or your audience or whoever are suddenly going, what's the AI angle? There must be a part of you that's like, well, there isn't one, and that's fine.
But I think
it's sort of okay for me to say that, but sometimes people just want, for that thing to exist.
But it's not like irrelevant to your area. It could be. People talk about AI as this sort of, it's a vague thing, but it sort of slips into different sectors, doesn't it? Different segments of the market. And actually, one of the interesting things that, I've forgotten his name now, Justin Hodar, the Intel guy who's taking over, said that I thought got overlooked because everybody was like, oh, well, he's not going to do anything to do with mobile. That's all like forgotten about.
People like me being absolutely
was talking about. No, it wasn't just you. There was a general feeling, I think, that we're like disengaging with mobile. But he did say we're looking at how AI could actually fit into the mobile network story as well. And there was a Cisco call this week which I thought was a really interesting comment because they never normally talk about telco very much on the earnings calls.
Oh, is that the full year results or the quarter results?
It was their second because they got a really weird calendar, but there was second quarter results. But Chuck Robbins was asked about telco by one of the analysts on the call, and he said this. I thought this was really odd that European telcos that they're talking to are thinking a lot more about doing edge-based AI deployments at the moment. There's a lot of people thinking and moving ahead with that.
There's a lot of hype around that. I think it's a little bit.
But he wasn't talking about it as hype.
Guys.
He was talking about it as like almost like an order opportunity for them.
Guys, I really hope they're not pursuing it because I'm very skeptical about that.
I'm going to butt in for two reasons. One, this is like a whole new can of worms that we could talk about for half an hour. Two, I just got a vibe from Pierre that my camera's about to run out of juice. So, and three, we must be about 2 hours now. So sorry to butt in. And that did sound like an interesting thing you two were about to chat about, but
another time.
Yeah, even 2 hours. I mean, it goes by quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I will wrap it up. Thanks. It was great. I can't believe we haven't had you on before, Pablo, but it was great. And
I know.
you're
I had to self-invite myself.
You did have to, which is
but,
my bad for not inviting
thank you very much to Pierre for kind of telling me to self-invite myself. I appreciate your
it was your fault.
It is my fault. It's my bad. And as a parting shot, I want to commend you for people who are listening, on the colour of your jumper, which I think only an Italian could pull off. So that was great fun.
Would you say that's magenta?
Yeah, I think that is a bit T-Mobile, that jumper, isn't it?
Yeah. John Leger.
A little bit pinker.
Yeah. But I mean, I wouldn't dare go in that direction.
I can't imagine you wearing that.
Anyway, that's just me fucking around. So I'll wrap up. We're not going to have one next week because there's half term and Pierre's got half term shit to do. Those of us who've got more grown up kids, we're just like, yeah, whatever, do your own thing. So you'll have to wait until, God, what is it? The 27th? What are we on? We're on the 14th, so we're not doing the 21st. Yeah, 27th.
Pre-MWC.
Yeah, and that'll be our pre-MWC one, which hopefully I'll mention him because I saw him the other day that he's coming on, Dean Bubley, who always does our pre-MWC one precisely because he's sceptical about MWC.
Should be a good one, yeah.
So yeah, you'll have to wait for that, and we'll publish that on the Friday before for people who are flying over. Until then, thank you for joining us, and make sure you join us for that one.